Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable, see playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 281, The Heavenly Sword. Elder Shu was stunned at what Kenneth said. It was quite high praise. Kenneth worked for the Cloud Hall and his knowledge went beyond the entirety of the Eastern region. He had seen the other side of the world. Billions of people lived in the Eastern region, and the Central region was over 10 times larger than the Eastern region. The 5 regions in total did not dominate the globe as one thought. They were but a small corner of the main continent on the map. The world was composed of people as many as the number of sand particles in the sea. It was almost impossible to keep count of. In this vast population, there were a number of geniuses. Zen had good talent and even better luck, but it was likely that there were people more powerful than him out there. Truth be told, Elder Shu was shocked at Zen's performance. The younger generation was better than the last, but could he really afford Kenneth's evaluation of being the reincarnation of an immortal? What did it mean for the world? Watching Elder Shu at a loss for words and looking like he couldn't accept Kenneth's statement, the latter smiled softly. Just kidding, Elder Shu, don't take it so seriously. Quote. Elder Shu was more than 100 years old. Hearing the leader make such a joke out of the blue, he remained petrified for a while, not knowing how to react. But Zen is truly special. No big shots were from his family in the past. It could be that his background and bloodline is ordinary, but in this generation, 2 heavyweights have been discovered already, Yan, who has a peculiar body constitution, and then Zen, who has incredible strength. They appeared successively. Don't you think that's a strange coincidence? Kenneth asked him. Elder Shu shook his head. Yes, it's a perplexing coincidence. But I don't find it too strange. Kenneth looked at the competition field and watched Zen's streamer sword reflecting the sunlight, with specks of gold glinting as the weapon flexed. He said, in fact, I don't find it strange either. I just feel that heaven makes surprising arrangements. It must be fate. Zen could be the dragon hiding in deep waters, but that wouldn't stop me from pushing him ahead. His current performance is exemplary. If he gets achievements in the Cloud Hall someday, it would benefit me. To enter any sect in this wide world was not easy, but the Cloud Hall would welcome a genius. After all, if a sect wanted to develop and get stronger, they must discover and cultivate these unmatched talents cyclically. If Zen made massive achievements in the future, Kenneth would stand to gain a lot from Cloud Hall. Elder Shu nodded silently. As a subordinate, he could not speak up and interfere in the leader's arrangements. Kenneth seldom showed up. The fact that he was willing to talk to Elder Shu for so long and that he opened up to his subordinate was enough. On the competition field, Rocher remained silent. He needed time to digest the shock Zen had brought on. After a while, he said, I started learning swordsmanship when I was 6 years old, and then comprehended a small part of the sword intent at the age of 10. When I was 13, I grasped the sword intent. And then I entered the consummation of nature level at 16. Even the ones who have reached the early stage of the illuminating soul realm do not qualify to be my opponents. In the Eastern region, few people are worthy of my admiration. Patrick was the first to deserve it. Zen, you are the second. But make no mistake, I will use all my strength in this round. I will leave no stone unturned. Zen nodded. Start the fight. The 2 geniuses didn't need to partake in offensive speech in this battle. They had real strength, and they were solid and firm like massive rocks. They knew that neither of them could get a rise out of the other through loose talk. Furthermore, a swordsman took a path of justice. What they learned from each other through their swordsmanship would be invaluable. They wouldn't get so far with throwaway words. Buzz. Rocher inched his blood-corroding sword closer to himself and the weapon seemed to hiss. Shifting his feet, he began the strange sword step. Watching Rocher, Zen couldn't hide the admiration in his eyes. If he was honest, Rocher comprehended the sword more deeply than him. Zen hadn't been cultivating the sword for long. He might have comprehended the sword intent and even caught up to Rocher in this skill, but he couldn't blend himself with his sword like Rocher. The latter was a natural at this. Rocher's sword step grew faster and faster, sword energy cyclones manifesting under his feet continuously. I will begin as well. Zen too moved his feet to the rhythms of the sword step. Although Zen carried out his sword step according to Rocher's, there was a slight difference between the two. Rocher's sword step was smooth in effect. Seen carefully, each step was calculated and equal in length to the 3-foot-long cutting edge of his blood-corroding sword. His sword step appeared soft but hid the killing intent cleverly. Once the edge was exposed, the killing intent would make itself known too. On the other hand, Zen's sword step looked random, yet natural. His steps were not as soft as Rocher's, but appeared more potent in power. The two stepped forward, setting a tempo with their feet as they faced each other on the competition field, looking for loopholes and mistakes in the opponent's moves. But since they had cultivated to this level, they knew how to hold on to their nerves. They wouldn't make mistakes easily. Their sword steps appeared to interlace with each other even as they competed, looking like a beautiful dance of sorts. The disciples of Cloud Sect were dazzled and expressed it in raised voices. This is so captivating. It's a treat for the eyes. If I can practice the sword step this way someday, I would be so strong at the nature level. If you want to learn the sword step, you would need to comprehend the sword intent first. If you do comprehend it, you would be invincible at the nature level, but do you really think you can do it? As people talked, Rocher struck first. Deciding to tip the balance scale, he launched an attack. He slid in his steps as if there was oil under his feet. When he finally stopped, 13 sword intent cyclones dashed in Zen's direction. 6 sword intent cyclones came from the front, 3 cyclones from the left and the right respectively, and the last one was from the air above. They moved in a whirlwind, blocking Zen in all directions. Nice. Facing the 13 sword intent cyclones coming at him, Zen too performed a slippery step. He created 4 sword intent cyclones. Even if his own sword intent cyclones were fewer than Rocher's, each cyclone was larger and more potent. Poof! The sword intent cyclones of the two opponents collided with each other and then shattered in the hit. It was a dead heat. Just then, Rocher unsheathed his sword. His attacks always went this way. At certain times, he wouldn't launch an attack at all, but once he attacked, he would fight non-stop, not giving any leeway. He had no plans to give the opponent a chance to even breathe halfway. Megre's sword. This was Rocher's first time wielding his sword in this round. When he wielded the sword, his breath seemed to change. The blood-corroding sword in his hand blurred. What was stranger was that Rocher pointed the sword upward, the hilt tipping toward the ground. Zen felt the strong sensation of pressure, as if the sky had fallen on him. Has he cultivated the heavenly sword? He can borrow the power of the heavens. Zen wondered at the scene before him as he raised his brows. Obviously, Rocher seemed to have borrowed heaven's powers to subdue Zen. The natural law of the heavens was profound. Millions of generations of humans couldn't see through it to this date. The power of the heavens was unmatched. After all, if the sky fell, who could fight it? But Rocher seemed to have borrowed a little of this power. He didn't have enough strength and hadn't yet touched the threshold of the natural law of the heavens, so he only had a tiny bit. But even that little bit of heaven's power was so dreadful that it gave Zen a hard time. He felt like he had a terrible dead weight over him, making him unable to breathe. Rocher is really powerful, but this power was borrowed, and he can't control it. My own swordsmanship is certainly all in my control. Zen chose not to retreat. Instead, he hit back with his basic swordsmanship. Chop. He made a simple arc. It was the most basic movement, but the power hidden in the sword was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. The greatest truths were the simplest of all. They reached the same goal by different means. No matter how they changed, they couldn't get to escape the simplest of sword moves. Crack. The two swords collided with each other, a clear sound resounding in the arena. Many swordsmen would retreat if they didn't have the upper hand in the sword move and then try to attack more aggressively. However, neither of the two seemed to want to back out. Clang! In the blink of an eye, the two opponents wielded their swords at each other 7 or 8 times in a row. They dodged the quick attack efficiently. It made the onlookers gawk at them in wonder. Both of them looked calm, as if they were not fighting with swords but sitting across each other in a silent game of chess. The disciples on the sidelines appeared far more nervous than the two on the competition field. Among warriors, swordsmen were the kings. They were also the most in number. As Rocher and Zen fought, the disciples of Cloud Sect held their breaths at the spectacle before them. Some swordsmen even clenched their fists, beads of sweat trickling on their foreheads. As swordsmen, they comprehended what was happening in this match. The disciples wouldn't understand a fight between top powerful men of the illuminating soul realm or those of other higher levels, let alone comprehend its intricacies. On the other hand, Zen and Rocher were strong, but not much more powerful than the other disciples. As long as the swordsmen got a gist of what was occurring behind the swordsmanship, they too could promote themselves. Some of them might even experience breakthroughs in such a situation. They have wielded the sword 50 times now. 100 times. 150 times. Rocher sighed heavily, at last moving back in silence. He realized he couldn't prevail against Zen when it came to swordsmanship, so it was meaningless to fight him through sword moves. There was simple power hidden behind Zen's basic swordsmanship. But when the simple went to the extreme, it became more complex. However, this was not a contradiction. It was just a complicated tactic. Rocher couldn't see through Zen's basic swordsmanship. As soon as Rocher stood steady at a distance, he drew a circle with the sharp sword in his hand casually. Life vitality spread out around him. Mixed with the sword intent, it made the blood-corroding sword buzz with life. The light and dark swordsmanship. I am not cruel, but I must prove the power of the heavens. Momentum spread across Rocher's body. His demeanor seemed to have changed, as if he were a spokesman of heaven in a world of humans. He looked like he was the son of heaven. Megre's sword, Dubi's sword, Merrick's sword, Fekta's sword, start all 4 kinds. Chapter 282, 4 in 1. There were hundreds of ways to use a sword and 100 other ways to use it spiritually. The swordsmanship Rocher had been practicing was called Heavenly Sword. This was a very potent cultivation method that did not belong to Tier 4 or Tier 5. In fact, even the second-tier methods did not contain this illustration, simply because of the fact that the method did not belong to any tier at all. This cultivation method was highly special. It was constituted by only one illustration, which was called the Heavenly Sword illustration. The illustrious method had turned up around 875 years ago, and at that time, it had stirred up quite a bit of turmoil in the eastern region. The noble clans, the Burning Sky Palace, the Cloud Sect, and all the independent mighty practitioners as well which were scattered across the numerous counties of eastern region had chased it like a lion chased its prey. They had been extremely eager and the illustration had seen its fair share of blood. Rumor had it that the Heavenly Sword illustration contained a powerful theurgy. If one mastered it, she would grasp the concepts of heavens and attain immortality. Hundreds, thousands. No one knew just how many outstanding figures lost their life to the battle for this illustration. In the end, it had been Cloud Sect itself which had managed to defeat all other competitors and obtained the Heavenly Sword illustration. Later on, it was sent to the Burning Sky Palace for safekeeping. The news had made a lot of practitioners grind their teeth in resentment. They wanted the illustration for themselves but they could not afford to mess with Cloud Sect or Burning Sky Palace. None of them had ever dared to break into the heavily guarded Burning Sky Palace and try to steal the Heavenly Sword illustration. People had thought it was going to be hidden forever but things had gone south. Exactly 1 year later, several copies of the Heavenly Sword illustration appeared in market. It was said that those copies had been leaked from the Burning Sky Palace itself. Why the palace leaked the copy of such a powerful method, no one had a clue. Rumors said it wasn't intentional. But the practitioners had still scrambled for them, even though they were just copies. If they failed to get one by force, they were even willing to pay a high price to buy one. A simple piece of paper, available in trash cans, once printed with the illustration could go for as high as the equivalent of about 600 pounds of pure gold. The practitioners still didn't find the price outrageous, even though the common folks of the city said that it was appalling even for such a powerful cultivation method. Several business-minded clans and merchants had bought a copy with a large sum of fortune, and then made several more of it to sell on their terms. Even at half price, the sheer demand was so high that they made another fortune with it. Pretty soon, there came a time when almost everyone in the eastern region had managed to land himself a copy of the Heavenly Sword illustration. The parchment then became like salt and its price began to plummet. Slowly the 600 pounds equivalent price turned into a single figure. This had happened because, being a simple piece of paper in the first place, there were now too many people who were producing copies of the illustration. That was only the secondary reason. A far more important reason arose when every single practitioner found that he or she just could not figure out a single thing about the Heavenly Sword from the Heavenly Sword illustration. They failed to understand it no matter how hard they tried, and had no clue what the heck it was. Feeling that they had been fooled, those practitioners naturally became angry and dumped the heavenly sword illustration on streets and in skewers as if it was nothing but trash. This way, the highly powerful cultivation method found itself as the most widespread one among the eastern region, and also the cheapest one. It was possible to practice this cultivation method, that much was certain. But the ability and the talent that its comprehension required was just too much for anyone to master. In the last 8 centuries, among millions of practitioners in the eastern region, there had been 3 extraordinary guys who had successfully managed to master the method against all odds. Zeki Zhu, who lived 633 years ago, Matthias Xuanyuan from 400 years ago, and Zainao from about 100 years ago were the only ones to have mastered it. Till now. And even though the 3 were all highly gifted, they had still only managed to learn 3 parts. The Megrez sword, the Dubi sword, and the Merrick sword were the first 3 parts of the method but not the complete story. One could combine the whole into one if only one were gifted enough. In so many generations throughout history, the 3 had only learned the first 3 parts. From that legend, it was easy to imagine just how hard it was to practice the complete heavenly sword. And that was why few practitioners chose to practice this impressive cultivation method in spite of the easy access to its illustration. It was just not designed for ordinary people. Its legend had spread far and wide, and finally, after 875 years, Rocher had achieved the 4th part of the method. The 4th part, it's the 4th part. Rocher has grasped the 4th part, Fekta sword, of the heavenly sword illustration. Good heavens, he is the first one to manage that in 800 years. Yeah, he is going to be a legend. Hang on, it seems like Rocher has not only been able to grasp the 4th part, he is going to display the 4 swords all at once. He is gonna merge the 4 swords and use them all at once. Zen is a goner now for sure. I agree, now Zen is going to be in trouble. You know, I once heard that each part of the heavenly sword can draw support from the power of the heavens. It is said that any practitioner who can manage the heavenly sword is a man favored by the heavens, or we could call him son of God. Once the 4 swords are out, Zen will definitely lose. At first I thought that Zen was the one more powerful between the 2, but I think we now know that in front of Rocher, Zen has no chance at all. A tiny shadow of a seed suddenly burst open before Rocher. Then, a fine tread emerged on the top of his head and abruptly shot up into the sky. In an instant, a gigantic whirlwind tornado appeared in the sky. As it came into being, it cascaded down towards the ground at a furious pace. Soon as it touched the ground, it started to dissipate like mercury spilled onto the earth. This whirlwind was the vitality between the heavens and the earth. The vitality itself was extremely violent and dangerous, especially when it had not been refined by practitioners and transformed into life vitality yet. But due to that precise reason of not being refined, it still contained a trace of the natural law in it. In fact, it was said that when a practitioner reached higher levels of cultivation, and entered stronger realms, he would, in theory, be able to utilize this vitality between the heavens and the earth at his will. It was almost like commanding the world. However, merely at the rank of nature-level consummation, Rocher could not directly make use of the vitality. That did not matter today. The heavenly sword never actually used the vitality. It merely drew support from it, and that it could manage without Rocher's help. Even drawing support from the vitality meant that Rocher was extremely powerful beyond thoughts and imagination. 4 in 1, he commanded. A faint shadow of a sword intent appeared around Rocher's blood-corroding sword. He had employed the sword intent to trap the natural law inside his sword. Using this extreme momentum which could generate ultra-high quantities of impulses, he thrust immediately at Zen. Although sword movements were of great importance in combating, the role those movements played could be outshone by the absolute power the sword carried. As the sword shoved forward, it was like the sky had flipped over. The very air seemed to vibrate and twist. The sun seemed to shimmer. The power of Rocher's 4-in-1 sword was formidable to say the very least. But it completely differed from Jacques' soul attack, and was not supposed to cause any damage to one's spirit. Therefore, the audience was just a bit out of breath due to the overbearing air of this sword, unlike the last time when Zen and Jacques battled. In that battle, their souls had been bled dry of courage and they were almost gone. This time around, their souls were intact. At the sight of Rocher's sword, an opponent who was a little wimpish or didn't have a strong willpower would have practically wanted to turn around and flee, because he wouldn't have had the guts to face it. The disciples of Cloud Sect who were standing or sitting off the arena were already so unnerved, one could imagine just how Zen was doing on stage. At this moment, Zen felt like he had entered a fairyland. Everything looked ethereal, and there was only one gull on this land. He was standing by an endless coastline all alone, watching the entire sky collapse and bear down upon him. This was not a spiritual attack. And all the scenes Zen saw were just a series of illusions caused by the menacing air of the sword. It's just some support he has drawn from the heavens and the earth, but the effect is already so amazing. What a powerful method. It's dangerous too, a bit too extreme for my taste. Clutching his streamer sword, Zen cried to the sky, how do I tackle this one? If this were any other disciple facing such a situation, he or she would have most probably been on the verge of having a nervous breakdown. Once his heart went unsteady, he would lose the battle right away and wouldn't find any more chance to turn the tables. However, Zen's heart had long since become as tough as a rock. Even if the sky had really caved in this time, he would have fought through till one of them won. And this was only a bluff that Rocher made up with the help of the vitality his method was drawing support from. As the illusion advanced on him, Zen's life vitality slowly began to circulate inside him, almost as if in self-defense. His demonic life vitality gradually climbed up along the hand that was holding his sword. Stars were glittering above the dark purple aura of life vitality which was fluttering around the streamer sword. The stars themselves were roaming around in spirals or ellipses. Flick the sword. This was the most powerful move that Zen had grasped by himself whilst learning basic swordsmanship. Simultaneously as his sword stabbed forward, the spots of starlight strewn across the demonic life vitality suddenly sprang to life. In theory, each of these spots could release a shot of overwhelming energy, which was already quite potent. But right before the All Peaks competition, Zen had, without any prior intentions, unexpectedly entered the Sun Moon Stars picture. In there, he had received an insight on how to boost the power of the starlight while he was observing and meditating. It was theorized that the collision of even two spots of starlight could make the already overwhelming energy 10 times more dangerous. Boom! With a deafening bang, two of the spots crossed paths and clashed, radiating blinding rays of light as if two real stars in the sky had bumped into each other. Precisely at that very second, Zen's sword lunged forward. Aided by the fusion of the stars, his sword was now carrying fierce and terrible amounts of energy. He has merely taken advantage of a bit of the vitality between the heavens and the earth. Meh, that aura is nothing, Rocher. Even if the sky had actually fallen down, I would have still crumbled you. Zen bellowed inside his mind, strengthening his resolve even more. Rocher's 4-in-1 sword converged with Zen's sword. At that moment, both of the contestants saw the towering determination in each other's eyes. They were both determined to win in any possible way. Bang! With another loud clang, a ball of blazing light instantaneously rose from the arena. As its shine increased and reached blinding levels, everyone felt the heat and became blinded for a moment. After quite a while, the audience gradually started to recover their vision. What was going on? Slowly, as the arena came into focus, they saw that Zen was still standing in the same spot he had been, as motionless as a statue, while Rocher had been forced 5 steps backward, with a trace of blood hanging at the corner of his mouth. Holy cow! Zen's one-sword attack pierced the monstrosity that Rocher conjured up. A disciple shouted indecorously. Chapter 283, Blood Burning. Surprisingly, the battle between Zen and Rocher was less ferocious than that between Zen and Jacques. At least for the moment, it looked like that. After all, the Cyan Dragon's roar during that particular event had been terrifying, shocking, and destructive. It was the sort of thing that Zen would never forget. Although Zen's horrible strength had erupted fighting with Jacques, his battle with Rocher was more fascinating. This was because most of the previous battle had been fought secretly. Zen had used his demonic life vitality to shroud the fighting pit in mist and not let anyone see. Though the audience had heard the terrifying roars of dragon, they had no idea what was going on inside that mist. But this battle, between Zen and Rocher, was something else. Both of them were swordsmen who had a thorough understanding of the sword intent. They were considered one of the best sword masters in Cloud Sect, and the battle between them was extremely balanced, so much that it could have ended in a stalemate. One of them was a once-in-a-century genius who had already penetrated deep into the supernatural mysteries inside the heavenly sword illustration. Therefore, he was capable of using the power of the heavens against his enemies. The other man, a simple and noble practitioner, wielded his sword in a mysterious but basic way. He refused to cower even while confronting the heavens' power. His sword was held smartly and he fought back effectively. Seeing this, all the disciples of the Cloud Sect were unimaginably excited. After Rocher's failed heavenly sword demonstration, they were now looking forward to seeing something much bigger and more shocking. The elder disciples of the Cloud sect had already witnessed the all-peak competition many times in their lives, and they had, at times, even been able to anticipate the outcome. However, none of the previous competitions could have been compared to this. Rochet's abilities in wielding a sword are unbelievable. I mean, he is the first guy ever to enter the 4th level of the Heavenly Sword. And he is the first in 8 centuries. And Zen's more than that. He has even been able to confront the forces of the Heavenly Sword with some basic sword methods. I have never seen anyone defeating mystical things with basic skills all my life. It's unfair. When I was practicing the sword, the wizard in my village told everybody that I was born to be a great and successful swordsman. But it turns out that I'm just a joke compared to these two guys. Zen is the sort of person you'd call crazy. He succeeded in making use of such ordinary things to defeat such superpowers. How could he manage to exert enormous power by wielding his sword in some basic ways? While the disciples discussed the battle, the elders and the saints who were watching the battle from outside the fighting pit sighed that their time was now gone. This era now belonged to these young and talented disciples. So many talented and excellent disciples had shown themselves in this all-peak competition, each with their own area of expertise. One of them would surely grow up and start a glorious, new era. Rocher wiped the blood from around his mouth. He stared at Zen coldly, surprised. He had thought that his 4-in-1 art of fencing was powerful enough to beat Zen and had never expected Zen to survive that. However, he had clearly underestimated his opponent and his fighting capacity. Zen just flicked his sword, which had exerted a simple but extremely powerful force, in which the force of the stars was hidden. It had been strong enough to shield him against heavenly forces. What surprised Rocher the most was that Zen had created the force of stars merely with his life vitality instead of borrowing its power from other places. Even after that, how could he defeat the Heavenly Sword? In contrast to Zen, practicing the art of Heavenly Sword and trying to learn from the Heavenly Sword illustration had allowed Rocher to communicate with the heavens. It was a rare thing to accomplish, but Rocher had succeeded, despite all odds. Therefore, he had become the real master of the Heavenly Sword. This way, his powers just now had come from the heavens themselves. He had actually borrowed the heavenly forces for this attack. None of them were his. However, the forces of the stars were the ones Zen had artificially created through contemplation. How was that even possible? Did he accomplish this by looking at the stars? It was rumored that some warriors from the eastern region had once tried to look at the stars and contemplate to enhance their martial arts. After they had entered the nature level, all of them were known to be trying so desperately to find some strange things for their contemplation. They would carefully look at sword, knife, bow and arrow, stone, tree, house, picture or other strange and seemingly unrelated things. Some had even gone further and tried to look at the stars, the moon, and the sun. But the stars were far away and subtle. How could they succeed in borrowing power from stars? How could they turn their life vitality into the force of stars? And even if some of them had managed to make some progress, none of them had actually succeeded in figuring out the spirits of the stars. When they had tried to turn their life vitality into stars, all they had got in return was useless stones. There was no force near the stars to find. Nothing. Therefore, those warriors had abandoned the seemingly powerful but actually useless things like the moon, the sun, the stars, the sea and the mountain. These things only looked impressive or even imposing. However, time and time again, they had failed to empower the warriors. It was worth mentioning that some talented folks had accidentally figured out how the star force worked, but those were just legends. And none of them had ever risen from the eastern region. Rocher had no idea that Zen didn't have to contemplate and search for the stars in the sky. He just needed the sun-moon-stars picture, which didn't belong to this world at all. The strength of the masters who had drawn and produced the sun-moon-stars picture had been unimaginable. I thought that I had no rival at the same level with me. Even the warriors who have reached the illuminating soul realm would have surely suffered defeat at my hands. I have only one rival, Patrick. If I was fighting with him right now, I would have stood a 50-50 chance of success. However, if I, with strength of the nature level consummation, had reached the illuminating soul realm, it would have been impossible for me to lose. Rocher remarked slowly. Patrick remained motionless and showed no emotions on his face, sitting cross-legged and with his eyes closed. Then, Rocher added, I need to think bigger and go to a larger world. The eastern region is too small for me and discourages me to grow up or become stronger. I have the whole world ahead of me to conquer. I need to challenge the thousands of talents born in this world. I need to do better than this little sect. After the All Peaks competition, I don't care if I'm allowed to walk across the cloud road or not. I will go to the central region and find a bigger world to conquer. Hearing Rocher's brave and bold words, all the disciples took a deep breath. None of them had ever thought that Rocher could be so ambitious. Everyone had dreams. Warriors from humble backgrounds wished to reach high levels so as to help their families' survival and to seek better social status for themselves. Business-minded folks wanted to make vast amounts of fortune in this world. However, warriors from the noble clans dreamed bigger. They had to fight their way out among their brothers and sisters, contending for the position of the head of the whole family. Then, they would make great efforts and spend vast amounts of time in leading their family to a place where it could stand out among all the other clans and families. However, none of them had ever dared to compete with families from other regions. The central region was much bigger than the eastern region. The top 7 noble clans could ride roughshod in the eastern region, but they would be a completely fool if they ever dared to do that in the central region. Rocher was either remarkably brave, or foolishly bold. He thought that he could beat those families from the central region and from the other parts of the world. The world was vast in size. Most of it hadn't even been explored yet. He was more like a beggar from a small town in his efforts, a person who had no idea of how big his country was. However, all of a sudden, he had announced that he would be the king one day. This sounded laughable, but, even an emperor, before founding the Burning Sky Empire, was born a beggar before he had finally become a ruler. Anybody with such an ambitious plan was better than most of the disciples from the Cloud sect. Meeting you before I leave the eastern region is such a surprise to me. Zen, do you know that you, with just 2 steps into the nature level, used some basic sword techniques and beat my 4-in-1 sword? I practice the heavenly sword, and that allows me to strike a sympathetic chord with the heavens. I think our meeting is a gift from the god. Perhaps you're a test to me. If that is the case, then I simply have to defeat you and move further, because I can't defy the wish of God. The blood on Rocher's blood-corroding sword seemed to come alive and vibrated slowly on the blade itself. A few seconds later, a seed appeared between his eyebrows. He raised his sword slowly and calmly told him, I have prepared this for Patrick. But now I have to use it to defeat you. Suddenly, the seed ruptured. With a crack, blue light shot from inside Rocher's eyes, and his temperament changed fundamentally. My precious sword, I'm appealing on behalf of the heavens. Help me and drive the endless cycle of birth, death and rebirth. Bang, bang. With the spell that Rocher had just used, the weather suddenly became more violent and fought itself restlessly. The wind rises, Patrick remarked, eyes still closed. Sitting outside the fighting pit, he could even feel the currents moving around him, which was the abnormal phenomenon Rocher had caused, and now, those currents seemed to be in his command. The wind got stronger as the vitality from the skies and the earth accumulated into one more and more quickly. The sword technique used by Rocher in the last round was called 4-in-1 sword, which had gathered the power from the sky to strike Zen. It had looked like the sky itself was falling towards Zen, trying to crush and kill him. However, this time it was different. Rocher had collected the sky strength and was holding it in his sword. A few moments later the wind stopped and Rocher stood there with his sword in his hand. The currents of a violent storm were now trapped inside his sword, begging to be released. At this very moment, he was extremely normal, except for his blue eyes. He seemed like a regular sword man, standing there quietly. However, this seeming silence was a great threat to Zen. He clearly knew that the strength behind his abnormal calmness was much more terrifying than his 4-in-1 sword had been. That did not mean that Zen was afraid. At this moment, he found that his blood was racing around in his veins and his heartbeat was accelerating more and more quickly. He was getting extremely excited. I come from a humble family. Before joining the Cloud sect, my biggest dream was seeing my sister one more time, though it hasn't been achieved yet. But my dedication to the practice of martial arts is no less than you, Rocher. I also really want to climb up to the top of the mountain and see the big world. Thinking about this, Zen's eyes suddenly became as red as burning fire. He wielded his sword, and the sword intents which were now being released, looked like lotus flowers in full bloom. The demonic life vitality he had hidden, was mixed with starlight and flowing on his sword. Both of them gathered their strength for a long time before their swords finally clanged one more time. One more furious move about to decide the outcome of this battle. However, only normal impacts were produced and limited power was released. In comparison, the fencing in the last round had been much more terrifying and stunning. To be very frank, even the training of the disciples usually looked more stunning than this round of sword fight. Two sword shadows met for a moment and then they separated. Not even a sound was made. What's happening? Much cry and little done. I thought the whole world would be turned upside down once again. Such a disappointment. Is it over? Is it done? Who won? Is the referee saying anything? What's he trying to do? Trick us. It's gonna be a total disappointment. I have been waiting for this for such a long time. I just can't believe that the game is over in such a simple and ordinary way. The sudden end of the competition gave rise to much discussion among the audience. None of them knew what had happened. On the other hand, the saints of the sect and even Patrick kept their eyes open, as they stared at the fighting pit, surprised and shocked. Tracy, hiding in a corner, had to cover her mouth to prevent herself from screaming out, because she seemed to have figured something out. She also looked horrified. Chapter 284, The Sword Mountain. One might remember that although Tracy was strong, her strength lay in her talent and blood, rather than in her diligence. As far as knowledge and experience was concerned, she was nowhere close enough to the saints and elders of Cloud Sect, or even Roche and Patrick. So naturally, the reasons for their surprise were quite different. Patrick was surprised because he understood what had happened inside the combat ring. Tracy's shock did not arise from the fact that she had understood something, but because her blue phoenix's blood was tingling inside her body. Even though not knowing what had actually happened, the tingling phoenix blood inside instinctively sent a feeling of fear all across her body, as if some sort of natural defense mechanism. The tingle was enough to tell her that something extraordinary had happened around her. The blue phoenix was a legendary bird and was capable of extremely strong perception skills. It could sense things. If there was any danger in the surrounding environment, the blood of the blue phoenix would tingle, warning the owner of the danger. This was why Tracy was shocked and had almost screamed out. Patrick didn't have the blood of the blue phoenix and therefore, could not sense something unusual. However, he had already noticed that the skills utilized in the fight between Zen and Roche had been far beyond their cultivation levels. This also meant that whatever had happened was also not some common phenomenon. If my eyes don't deceive me, then their swordsmanship has just reached the most perfect level there can be. Both Zen and Roche have taken inspiration from the fight and both reached the consummation level of the sword intent. Patrick muttered under his breath. An expectant expression, almost ecstatic, secretly flashed on his face because he thought that he had finally found his match. Until now, there was only one disciple in the entire Cloud Sect who ranked stronger than Patrick did among the hundreds of thousands of disciples being trained every day. Evan was the strongest disciple of the Cloud Sect and of course, above Patrick. His identity was somewhat special. Strictly speaking, he shouldn't have been counted as a disciple of the Cloud Sect, and Patrick should be the #1 disciple in the sect. For that reason, Patrick had paid little attention to the All Peaks competition at first. With his strength, and Evan not participating, no one would have been Patrick's match. It didn't matter whether he faced the top disciples of the 33 Peaks or personal disciples of the saints and elders of Cloud Sect. The final result of this All Peaks competition did not make him curious or expectant since no one could have inspired his fighting will. But as the competition progressed and Zen and Roche gradually showed their strengths in the round-robin competition, Patrick found that the All Peaks competition had become more and more interesting. He had been deeply impressed by Zen's victory over Tracy and Jacques and Roche's unique heavenly sword. The competition had become more fascinating than ever. Finally, he had found someone who could have matched him in this competition. Both Zen and Roche had the ability to fight him and could, perhaps, even defeat him in some stroke of luck. He should become serious now. However, he completely disagreed with Roche's claim that he had a 50% chance of defeating him. It was not that Patrick despised Roche. On the contrary, he deeply admired the contestant and was impressed by the fact that he could master the 4 swords of the heavenly sword just at the consummation of nature level. When he himself had been at the consummation of nature level, he had been much weaker than Roche was right now. After Patrick's practice of the Buddhist cultivation method, his personality and mentality had become very relaxed, and he was very open-minded when looking at the problems in his life. In his eyes, the highest possibility Roche could have had of defeating him was not 50%, but 30%. To be honest, that was a very high evaluation indeed. After all, Patrick was a strong master at the illuminating soul realm while Roche was at the consummation of the nature level. The gap between their cultivation level was vast. But things were different now. Patrick hadn't expected that Rocher would be able to comprehend the consummation of the sword intent. He realized that his assessment of Rocher's ability had indeed been lower than he deserved. Patrick deemed that Zen was slightly stronger than Rocher. Although he hadn't been as remarkable as Rocher, he had used a lot of skills one by one during the fight, which had stunned the audience. In view of such an opponent, Patrick, who had always been calm, had become a little restless. The important part of being a warrior was to not let your enemy get into your head, and Zen had managed that. And who knew if Zen was hiding more skills up his sleeve? This unfathomable feeling made Patrick realize that of all the contestants in this year's competition, Zen was perhaps the most deserving to fight with him. Patrick thought to himself, however, it is difficult for him to defeat me. It is highly probable that he will be restricted by his low cultivation level. What gets me is that at his current strength, it is weird to see him only at second grade of nature level. What was more unexpected was that Rocher and Zen had reached the consummation of the sword intent at the same time in battle. The sword intent was an artistic conception which was extremely difficult to comprehend and equally difficult to master. Why was there no sound when the two swords clashed? The audience was shocked because when Zen's streamer sword and Rocher's blood-corroding sword, two first-class weapons, had collided so hard, no sound was heard. It was as if they were made of paper. The reason for this lack of bang with the flash was that as soon as they realized the consummation of their sword intent, they had entered a perfect state of epiphany, and it had suppressed the sound completely in an instant. It wasn't that they were not powerful enough. Rather, all their life vitality and bodily strength had disappeared at once when they had reached the consummation of the sword intent. At that moment, the only thing for them to possess was the sword intent. Everything else would have gone blank to make way for it, and therefore, there was no sound. Patrick looked at Zen and Rocher, then closed his eyes. He hadn't had a psychological fluctuation in his brain for a long time, but today there was a slight perturbation in there. He wanted to make it go away, since this was a great taboo in practicing Buddhist cultivation method. No fluctuation is calm, no change is constant. Sooner or later, I will have to fight the two. And I will defeat them. Calm down, Patrick murmured to himself. Did they both just realize the consummation of the sword intent at the same time? Wondered Kenneth. He couldn't help rubbing his rough hands together with an expression of ecstasy on his face. There were not many people in the world who would be able to comprehend the sword intent. One who could cultivate the sword intent was considered genius and was sure to become a successful practitioner in the eastern region. As for those who could realize the consummation of the sword intent, they were often listed among the top ranks of the Cloud sect. All the saints and elders wanted such top disciples listed under them as personal disciples. Rocher was a man of ordinary origins. After he was admitted to Cloud sect, numerous elders had wanted to take him under themselves as their own disciple because of his excellent performance. But Rocher felt a strong sense of belonging to Skytop Peak and was not willing to be a personal disciple. Therefore, he had been staying at the Skytop Peak until now. Zen had cultivated swordsmanship only for a short time, and his skills of sword steps had been learned from Rocher stealthily. Until this competition had taken place, most people in Cloud sect didn't even know his name. So no elder had been keen on recruiting him to be his own disciple. The Cloud sect attached great importance to the disciples who had got the great achievement on the sword intent, so did Kenneth, the head of Cloud sect. Because these disciples had unfathomable future potential, and Kenneth would recommend them to the Cloud Hall. After this round of the competition, Kenneth was satisfied that he had found two disciples who had realized the consummation of the sword intent at the same time in battle. To the best of his knowledge, such a thing had never happened before. It could have been called a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And to be honest, such a thing happening in the middle of the fight was even beyond the swordsman's expectations, let alone Kenneth's. The superior abilities of the two guys were enviable. Some people were thinking that sometimes, life really was unfair. When someone had realized the consummation of the sword intent, they would enter a special state. This state had the power to shake both time and space and even bend reality itself. Not much was known about it. All Patrick knew was that sound and life vitality would dissipate when a cultivator realized the consummation of the sword intent, but he didn't understand the principle. As leader of Cloud sect, Kenneth had broad and profound knowledge, so he knew the reason. The two swordsmen were so powerful that they had both entered into a special state of epiphany that accompanied the consummation of sword intent, especially when it happened at the same time. This state would cause a slight dislocation of space around them. Elder Shu cast a meaningful look at Kenneth and saw him in an ecstatic state. Kenneth laughed on his curious glance and told him, "I've found treasures." It seemed certain that Zen and Rocher would pass the exam of Cloud Road, since they had reached the consummation of sword intent at the same time. There was enough in that to make Cloud Hall attach importance to them. And Kenneth was confident that Zen and Rocher would both perform excellently on Cloud Road anyway. To be accurate, Kenneth's evaluation of them was not excellent, but good. After all, the Cloud Road was not easy to pass through. He had to keep a margin in his evaluation. Right now, Zen and Rocher were on the ground, blissfully unaware of everything around them in a state of epiphany. Right now, the most important thing for them to do was to explore the sword intent and the mysteries that lay deep within it. There was no need to worry about winning the competition at the moment. Consolidating what they had just comprehended was the first task right now. However, not everyone was as knowledgeable as Patrick or Kenneth, and therefore, most of the disciples couldn't understand what was going on. What are they doing? This is competition time. Are they really going to cultivate right now? Boo, this is so boring. They didn't fight much yet. There was just some sloppy fencing, and since then, they have been sitting on the ground motionless. Is the competition over? Who won? They are wasting our time. Are they going to fight or not? Just as the crowd's complaints were getting loud, Elder Shu flew over them and snapped in a low voice, "Shut up you all. Zen and Rocher are cultivating in a state of epiphany. Don't disturb them. If anyone makes the least amount of noise after this warning, he is going to be expelled from Cloud Sect immediately," he warned. Hearing the warning from Elder Shu, the disciples became instantly quiet and didn't even dare to breathe abnormally. Cloud Sect attached great importance to training talents and did not tolerate anyone disturbing those talents. They focused especially on the geniuses which stood out from the disciples. It could be said that the value of several geniuses, such as Zen, Rocher, Patrick and Tracy, were almost equal to the value of hundreds of thousands of ordinary disciples combined. Being a genius meant that one could stand out from the hundreds of thousands of disciples, while mediocrity would only remain unknown. Cloud Sect was very tolerant. Every disciple would get a variety of benefits and welfare as soon as they entered Cloud Sect. But Cloud Sect was cruel too. The resources it showered on the gifted were far apart from those it allowed the ordinary people to have. That was the system. Zen felt that he was in a strange state. It was supposed to be dark and he should not have been able to see anything since his eyes were closed. But right now, he could see a mountain standing erectly in front of him. It was a mountain with swords struck on it everywhere, protruding like rocks here and there. Chapter 285, Killing Sword Mountain. The mountain that stood in front of Zen looked like a wild beast from ancient times. There were hundreds of thousands of swords embedded in the mountain, one on top of the other, from the bottom to the top. These swords, Zen, amazed by the sight, was suddenly at a loss for words. It was hard not to gasp in awe as he looked at those long swords protruding from the mountain. The metal blades at the foot of the mountain were not high grade. But all were classified as mysterious weapons, whether low grade, middle grade, or top grade. A variety of sword types were in that mountain. There were wide blade swords, short handle swords, serpentine swords, jade swords, and so on. The mysterious weapons of different grades spread from the foot of the mountain to the top. But when Zen examined the slopes closer, he discovered the swords embedded there were not all the mysterious kind. There were also spiritual weapons. The spiritual weapons only covered the lowest portion of the mountain. Looking further up, Zen found many more fairy weapons halfway up its slopes. To his amazement, there were low-grade, middle-grade, and even top-grade fairy weapons. Even a low-grade fairy weapon was tough enough to make the martial artists of the eastern region go crazy. Disciples from the declining noble clans like Nori, and even family owners like James, didn't have a fairy weapon yet. The top 7 noble clans might have more low-grade fairy weapons, but on average, each family would only have a few of these, at most. Middle-grade fairy weapons were even rarer. Only 5 of the top 7 noble clans owned this type of weapon. The Yu and Yun clans were the 2 that did not have middle-grade fairy weapons. Each of the top 7 noble clans was fabulously wealthy and were known for having illustrious family backgrounds. And the inheritance that came down to the Yu and Yun clans was no weaker than that of the other 5 clans, so it was puzzling why they had yet to possess a middle-grade fairy weapon. So, it was not difficult to imagine how precious the middle-grade fairy weapon was in the eastern region. As for the top-grade fairy weapon with 3 fairy textures, it was already legendary. It might exist in the eastern region, but no one had ever seen it. However, there were many and various fairy weapons halfway up the mountain. There were tens of thousands of middle-grade and top-grade fairy weapons as far as the eye could see. And it shocked Zen to see so many of these fairy weapons stuck in the mountain. These were clumped together like cabbage, which anyone could take at no cost. It will likely ignite every scale of the cyan dragon in my body if I can swallow all these mysterious weapons, spiritual weapons, and fairy weapons. In his excitement, Zen didn't realize he had voiced out his thoughts. His gaze wandered further beyond the fairy weapons, and Zen found there were other swords that spread from the mountainside to the top ridge. What grade of swords could those be? Sacred weapons. Zen murmured in wonderment. If people of the eastern region found it hard to imagine a top-grade fairy weapon as a kind of powerful weapon, what more would they think about a sacred weapon? What exactly was this sword mountain anyway? Why was the mountain immediately visible to him as soon as he comprehended the consummation of the sword intent? Clouds and mist shrouded the upmost part of the mountain, so Zen was unable to see what was on it. But based on the way those swords were arranged presently, would there be divine weapons on top of the mountain? Using his present insight, Zen could well imagine the power and strength of the sacred weapon. But the might of the divine weapon was beyond his imagination. He had no idea what the divine weapon looked like, nor could he visualize its strength. He had a sense that in imagining, he would make it appear ridiculous. As an example, he thought of peasants from remote mountains who believed the shoulder pole used by the emperor to carry water was made of gold since the royal leader had a lot of gold and silver jewelry. And that was ridiculous. Inhaling deeply, Zen took a drink of water, restrained his cranky thoughts, and approached the sword mountain. When he reached the first mysterious weapon, he attempted to pry it out. But the low-grade weapon remained deeply embedded in the mountain and could not be pulled out. Initially, Zen thought his strength was insufficient, thus his failure. But after expending all his energy, it remained stuck in the ground, hardly moving an inch. Suddenly, Zen clearly heard a voice in his head. "It's a sword on the Killing Sword Mountain, so you cannot pull it out even if it is a mysterious weapon," he heard the voice say. It sounded quite old to him. Aghast at what he was experiencing, Zen stood still and asked, "Who are you?" "Who am I?" The voice spoke, and then laughed. "I've been inside your head for so long yet you don't even know who I am." There was a hint of desolation and majesty in his tone as he replied. "The Cyan Dragon, you're the Cyan Dragon," Zen blurted out. The young disciple could not believe what was happening. He had suspected a long time ago that the Cyan Dragon had his own consciousness as a dragon. But he had never taken the initiative to communicate with him until Zen competed with Jacques on the battlefield. The Cyan Dragon's goal then was to secure the Flood Dragon bone, and this was what eventually prompted him to roar so he could communicate with Zen. It was with the help of the Cyan Dragon that Zen finally defeated Jacques and swallowed the Flood Dragon bone. So technically, Zen didn't defeat Jacques with his strength alone but with the help of the Cyan Dragon. However, it didn't seem fair to Zen to give all the credit for the victory to the dragon. After all, Jacques also took advantage of the Flood Dragon bone spear in his hands. The birth of a genius always depended on several aspects: strength, talent, adventure, and luck. And you could not do away with a single one of them. "Yes, you are right. I am the Cyan Dragon in your mind," the dragon made the confirmation. It was when Zen ignited the first of his dragon scales that the Cyan Dragon woke up. But he didn't have much reserve energy to communicate with the young disciple after waking up. He had been confined to the mysterious smelting furnace for so many years and was far too weak. Although the heavenly essence could help the Cyan Dragon restore a fraction of his strength, there was only a little of this essence. There were too many scales on his body, and more than 100 dragon scales only occupied a small section of him. When the Cyan Dragon noticed that piece of the Flood Dragon bone on the battlefield, he finally decided to communicate with Zen. Usually, a Cyan Dragon hardly paid attention to a small part of the Flood Dragon's spine. As a genuine dragon, he thought the Flood Dragon was just a kind of beast many generations away from him. Therefore, there was not much genuine dragon blood within a Flood Dragon. Regardless of how little genuine dragon blood there was in a Flood Dragon, it would still help the Cyan Dragon, already too weak at this point, recover. Even a small amount of genuine dragon blood as a supplement could slowly restore the Cyan Dragon's strength. After swallowing the spine of the Flood Dragon, the Cyan Dragon finally regained strength and was able to communicate with Zen. "Did you just say this is the Killing Sword Mountain? Does this only exist in my mind? Why can't I pull out the sword stuck in this mountain?" Zen fired the questions rapidly in a show of confusion. Since the Cyan Dragon knew what this mountain was, he must also be aware of the secret of the Killing Sword Mountain. Haha, how is it possible that the Killing Sword Mountain exists only in your mind? The Killing Sword Mountain is a sacred place for practicing sword skills. It cannot belong to any one person. But it is almost dreamlike, the Cyan Dragon explained. Smiling gently, he went on, there was a resonance between your soul's consciousness and the Killing Sword Mountain when you comprehended the consummation of the sword intent, and then you were chosen to practice in the mountain. It is an opportunity for you. And your opponent today, the boy named Rocher, must have gone for practice in another place, but I guess wherever that is, it cannot compare to yours here. The one who has the chance to be chosen into the Killing Sword Mountain is. Ha ha ha. Abruptly, the Cyan Dragon stopped what he was saying as he laughed out loud. As curious as he was, Zen didn't dare ask the Cyan Dragon any more questions since it seemed he no longer wanted to say anything about the Killing Sword Mountain. What Zen was most concerned about now was how to practice in the sacred mountain. No sooner had he thought of the question when the Cyan Dragon continued, the Killing Sword Mountain is one of 3 sacred places for practicing sword skills. More than that, it is a way of practicing the killing sword skill. When the swordsman comprehends the consummate sword intent, there will be a slight chance for him to project his consciousness into the Killing Sword Mountain and have a contract with it. And what you need to do now is climb the mountain. Those swords under your feet. They are actually projections of weapons left by climbers who came before you. They are simply projections of other people's weapons, so of course, you can't pull them out. Incredulous, Zen asked, all those swords were left by others. Only then did he understand why he was unable to pull any of the metal blades embedded in the Killing Sword Mountain. There is no need to feel strange about that. The world is much bigger than you can imagine, and there are billions, no, trillions, of creatures practicing sword skills. Just as you have the chance to cultivate your skills in the Killing Sword Mountain, so do others. How high you can climb the mountain depends on your ability, the Cyan Dragon continued to speak in a calm tone. Climb the mountain, that's easy, Zen said confidently. Although the Killing Sword Mountain's aura came out much too strong, it was only a mountain after all. Mocking laughter was followed by, you can give it a try to test whether or not it's easy. But let me remind you that the higher you climb the Killing Sword Mountain, the more benefits you will reap. It's a rare opportunity for you, so you must take it. Once the Cyan Dragon had finished speaking, he kept quiet, just waiting for Zen's performance. The Cyan Dragon's words were replayed in Zen's head. The higher I climb the mountain, the more benefits I will get. Staring at the swords scattered on the mountain, Zen arched an eyebrow, inhaled deeply, then took on the challenge. With the streamer sword in hand, he advanced towards the Killing Sword Mountain a step at a time. He had only taken 2 steps when a few low-grade mysterious weapons suddenly began to vibrate. Then to Zen's surprise, a handful of sword intents shot out from those very weapons and headed towards him. Several thoughts raced in Zen's mind as he tried to comprehend all that was happening. These sword intents come from the masters of these low-grade mysterious weapons. And they're at the marrow refining level. He furrowed his brows in fascination. Based on what the Cyan Dragon just said, only those able to comprehend the consummate sword intent had the opportunity to practice on the Killing Sword Mountain. But at the same time, not every swordsman who fully understood the sword intent had the chance to get to this mountain. Because he comprehended the consummate sword intent when he was at grade 2 of the nature level, Zen was considered talented enough, yet someone was even more skilled than the young disciple. How could any person understand the consummate sword intent at the marrow refining level? The thought was a great shock to Zen. This kind of genius couldn't exist in the eastern region or even the central region, and for that matter, it was rare anywhere in the world. So it was truly unbelievable. Although unsettling, Zen wasn't depressed by his discovery. There is always something unfair in this world, he thought. Using himself as an example, Zen recalled he was imprisoned at age 15, while disciples from the noble clans had the privilege of taking pills, practicing Tier 4 cultivation methods, and using spiritual weapons that even masters of ordinary families did not have. And yet, all of these warriors had been surpassed by Zen by leaps and bounds. It took a very long time to practice and be a master in martial arts. Maybe it seemed inconceivable for Zen to comprehend the consummate sword intent at the marrow refining level, yet there was no question that he was a man of great power. After all, he surpassed the descendants with great family backgrounds and supreme blood. They were born with gifts that others couldn't even imagine, while all Zen had now was only enough for their meals. But when Zen thought about all the inequity in the world, he didn't care about them one bit. Since he wasn't born to a family with a great background, he would try his very best to take everything he desired little by little. Break into pieces, Zen shouted. Chapter 286, Demon Knight. Within seconds of facing the sword intense released by the low-grade mysterious weapons, the streamer sword in Zen's hand flashed brilliant silver lights. In the next instant, the sword intents were smashed to pieces. Zen continued to walk after breaking the sword intents. Now he faced the sword intents released by middle-grade mysterious weapons. The sword intents from middle-grade weapons were more powerful than those of low-grade mysterious weapons. Regardless, Zen's sword intent destroyed the sword intents from the middle-grade weapons. Zen walked briskly on the road leading to the mountain. The sword intents from the mysterious weapons had failed to block Zen's way. Every time Zen smashed the sword intent from a sword, the sword would immediately become obedient. It would stop vibrating and emit dots of light that resembled fireflies. These dots of light would then rush into Zen's body. At first, Zen tried to avoid the light dots. But when he found that there was no escape and that they posed no threat to him, he gave up dodging them. What are these light dots? Zen asked. Haha, these light dots are the spirits of the swords. The swords have spirits hidden in them. They are the embryos of the sword beasts. But the low-grade mysterious weapons and middle-grade mysterious weapons contain only a few sword spirits. You can accumulate them little by little. When you get enough sword spirits, your sword will cultivate a sword beast. The Cyan Dragon clarified. So that explained it. The more sword intents he killed, the larger the number of sword spirits he would accumulate. The killing sword mountain was not very big. Within a short while, Zen had smashed the sword intents from numerous low-grade and middle-grade mysterious weapons. When he reached the foot of the mountain, Zen encountered high-grade mysterious weapons. The sword intents from high-grade mysterious weapons were easy to destroy despite being stronger and sharper than the previous sword intents he had encountered. As Zen strode forward, the streamer sword in his hand glowed like a silver-white ribbon, strangling and slashing sword intents around him. Buzz, buzz. As sword intents were smashed one by one, swords fell by Zen's feet, and colorful sword spirits dashed toward him. As Zen walked past the foot of the mountain, he crossed the region with low-grade spiritual weapons and reached the range of high-grade spiritual weapons. He was nearing the mountainside now. The killing sword mountain is not as difficult to conquer as it seems, Zen said as he looked at the mountainside that he was approaching. Hearing Zen's words, the Cyan Dragon realized that he had probably given Zen too much hope. He chuckled and said, "Yes, it's easy because of your abilities. The owners of these swords were at least at the level of consummate sword intent. You have an advantage as your sword intent is more consummate and stronger than their sword intents, and relatively, you will feel easier when climbing the mountain. However, as strong and sharp as your sword intent may be, you are able to climb to the halfway up the mountain at best. This is your first time climbing the killing sword mountain, and your performance is not bad so far." Not bad. As the Cyan Dragon's comment sank in, Zen realized that his achievement was only slightly above average. But Zen didn't plan to stop and stick his sword into the ground there. He needed to challenge his limit, and see how far he could go with his sword. Buzz. The moment he climbed on the mountainside, a treasured sword suddenly soared toward him with a sharp noise. Is it a fairy weapon? Zen gazed at the purplish-blue treasured sword not far from him. The handle of the sword was carved with a fairy texture. It appeared to be a low-grade fairy weapon. Zen expected the purplish-blue sword to emit sword intent like the other swords he had encountered before. But soon he found that he was wrong. A shadow of a purple-haired girl popped out from the fairy weapon. The girl was extraordinarily beautiful, but she had no corporal body. She was ethereal, like a soul. She stretched her arm, and the purplish-blue sword flew to her hand. In the next instant, she swung the longsword at Zen. "Ah, what's this? Do souls exist on the killing sword mountain?" Zen asked in confusion. "It is not a soul, but a fully grown being of a sword spirit. You can get more sword spirits if you kill her," the Cyan Dragon replied. Zen examined the girl carefully. The shadow of the purple-haired girl looked lifeless, and her expression was blank. If it were a human soul, it would be the same as the souls of any human being in the world. It should have shown some emotions. Since the shadow didn't display any emotions, it was not a soul. As the Cyan Dragon indicated, she was the spirit of the sword. Smash! 3 quick tinkling sounds reverberated through the mountainside. Zen tested the shadow's swordsmanship by striking her with his sword thrice. Unexpectedly, the purple-haired girl showed extraordinary swordsmanship by easily deflecting all 3 blows. Moreover, after she blocked Zen's attack, she swung her sword at Zen. She was returning the attacks. The purple-haired girl's subtle sword techniques were unfathomable. Although the sword intent released from her sword was no match for Zen's sword intent, he realized that he had to take her seriously. Circle parry, lift up sword, chop. Zen lunged at his target with 3 basic swordsmanship moves. They were simple movements, but they contained deep sword laws. A metallic tinkling sound was heard. Within the first 2 movements, Zen had managed to disarm the purple-haired girl. His last move broke her sword. After the purple-haired girl turned to pieces, her sword returned to its original place on the ground. The purple light spots released from the girl's body flew into Zen's body. The sword spirits contained in the fairy weapon were tens of times more than those in spiritual weapons. Zen's streamer sword was also a low-grade fairy weapon, but Zen had failed to condense sword spirit in his sword. And it was more unlikely for him to be able to condense human-shaped sword spirit. Zen assumed that the owner of the purplish-blue treasured sword must be someone very special. He stood still for a moment and gazed at the purple sword. Then Zen strode forward and continued his journey. When he began to encounter more fairy weapons, Zen felt more challenged. Those who could own a fairy weapon must match if not exceed Zen's level. So the means they employed in fighting were not limited to sword intent only. For example, the purple-haired girl conjured from the purplish-blue sword was a signal for more challenging battles. Just like the purple-haired girl, Zen encountered numerous strange sword spirits in later battles. There were ferocious tigers, pythons, crocodiles, and even dragons, as many forms of sword intent as one could imagine. As it became more difficult to kill sword intents, Zen had to work harder to deal with them. When he encountered low-grade fairy weapons, it only took about 3 strikes for Zen to kill them. For middle-grade fairy weapons, it took him over 10 hits. Some sword intents were so powerful that it would take dozens of attacks. Thus his pace in climbing the mountain slowed. Do you feel the difficulty levels increasing? The cyan dragon smiled. It is only going to get more challenging as you ascend. But you have already done a good job reaching the halfway point of the mountain. If you insert your sword into the mountainside, you will be connected with the Killing Sword Mountain. That will benefit you a lot. Insert the sword into the mountainside. Zen raised his head and looked ahead. Several mountain ridges stood proudly behind the mountainside. And the swords on the ridges were all sacred weapons. The masters who had owned these sacred weapons far exceeded Zen in terms of strength. Given Zen's current power, he was like a little ant in front of those masters and could easily be trampled to death. I'm going to insert my sword on the ridges, Zen announced firmly as he had made up his mind. The higher the sword was placed on the mountain, the closer his connection to the Killing Sword Mountain would be, and the more benefits he would get. Anyone who took the challenge had hoped that they could insert their swords at a higher place. The ridges, haha. The cyan dragon laughed and then said, it is impossible. With your current strength, you would barely cross the halfway point of the mountain. The sword intents in high-grade fairy weapons are already stronger than you. And the ridges are where the sacred weapons stand. You are not a match to the masters who own the sacred weapons. Let me try. Zen's unyielding spirit motivated him to aim higher. Okay, go ahead. The cyan dragon had expected Zen to be persistent. He had been in Zen's mind for so long. Although most of the time he was dormant, from his observation, the cyan dragon had a fair understanding of Zen's traits and qualities. Zen's decision to pursue martial arts was as firm as a rock, and his determination surpassed that of average people. But in this world, only real strength mattered. No matter how strong one's heart was, reality would show a person how cruel life could be. Moreover, the rules of the Killing Sword Mountain were very rigid. The cyan dragon was forbidden from helping. Therefore, Zen could only rely on himself. In such a case, how was Zen supposed to cross the range of fairy weapons and climb up to the ridges? There is a low-grade mysterious weapon. Zen's eyes brightened as he found a low-grade mysterious weapon on the mountainside. The hilt of the sword was very common and in a style similar to that of a standard military longsword. It didn't appear special. However, 2 words, Demon Knight, were carved on the hilt. Look at this. Now explain to me why it is impossible for me to reach the ridges. Someone inserted a low-grade mysterious weapon on the mountainside, Zen said while pointing at the low-grade treasured sword. It stood out among the fairy weapons around it. The cyan dragon was also very surprised. He smiled and said, oh, it is from the Demon Knight. It's no wonder that they can insert a low-grade mysterious weapon here on the mountainside. The Demon Knight? Zen asked curiously. He didn't know what the name on the hilt stood for. The people from the Demon Knight are different from humans. It would be fair to say that this race surpasses most of the species. They are the group with the most horrible strength. It is said that the children from Demon Knight race begin cultivating while they are in their mother's womb. That way, when they are born, even though they are newborn babies, these children are full-blooded and with strength equivalent to humans at nature level. In other words, they are born as nature creatures. The cyan dragon smiled lightly. Born as nature creatures, Zen gasped in astonishment. Countless human warriors practiced martial arts for decades and stubbornly overcame all challenges regardless of cost to them, with the purpose of entering the natural level. Zen didn't expect that such a species existed where babies were born at the nature creature level. This was so unfair. No wonder that the swordsman from the Demon Knight was able to insert a low-grade mysterious weapon into the mountainside. They were indeed a species that could do wonders beyond anyone's imagination. Chapter 287, Sword Spirits. The world is so vast and full of wonders beyond your imagination. If you can truly climb to the top of martial arts, naturally, you will be able to appreciate some of these wonders, but it's just too difficult. Even the Demon Knight, a race so naturally powerful, is nothing compared to the various races across the world. Heaving a sigh, the cyan dragon shook his head. Such a powerful race is nothing in the context of the whole world. Zen was shocked. Having realized that he had exaggerated a bit, the cyan dragon quickly added, but even though mankind has some innate weaknesses, they can still achieve great things. You don't need to feel dejected. In light of your talent, luck, and, he trailed off. Although he wanted to mention the mysterious smelting surface, he eventually stifled the thought and said instead, you may still have a shred of hope to reach the peak. At that moment, Zen's sparkling eyes caught the cyan dragon's attention. It was as if stars were gleaming in his bright orbs. The dragon could tell that he was looking forward to the challenges in the days to come. This kid didn't listen to a word I said. Zen's reaction brought the cyan dragon a hint of gloom. As a member of the immortal dragon race, he had not had a taste of melancholy for who knew how many years. In the end, all he could do was shake his huge head. Perhaps I did underestimate this young man. Just then, Zen flickered his eyes on the mysterious weapon left by the Demon Knight and said, Cyan Dragon, I am a man of humble birth. Though I've had my achievements in Cloud Sect, I won't be complacent or gloat about what I've done, nor will I stop working hard so I can eventually live an easy life. We, humans, have a will to persevere and keep taking steps forward, even against a crowd of 1,000 men. Whatever or whoever gets in my way ahead, I will overcome them. Merely 1,000 men, almost like instinct, the Cyan Dragon wanted to retort. But Zen continued to explain. Of course, this doesn't only refer to the literal figure. It's inevitable. I'm going to have to challenge countless strong creatures in the world, the talents among maybe thousands, millions, or even trillions of creatures. Since ancient times, there were those who shot for the stars always, without a doubt, had extraordinary talent and great perseverance. As Zen grew up, he encountered astonishing geniuses, one after another, and his horizon grew wider and wider. The martial artist had met Jacques, Rocher, Patrick, and many more. The stronger his opponent was, the firmer his aspiration became to climb to the peak of martial arts. In the eyes of the Cyan Dragon, Zen's current power was like that of a tiny ant, maybe even less. However, the man's burst of resolution and desire to dominate reached the dragon's heart. This little guy is pretty interesting. It's a shame. It would be delightful if I could wake my third brother and discuss this with him. Well, let's just wait and see, muttered the dragon in his head. As a matter of fact, the 9 dragons came from the same clan. Somehow, they had turned into sculptures and stationed themselves around the mysterious smelting furnace. Now that the furnace entered Zen's mind, the 9 dragons naturally followed. As far as first impressions went, the Cyan Dragon did not think very highly of Zen. Judging by his standards, Zen seemed rather mediocre in all aspects. To the dragon's surprise, however, he found that the young man had been progressing at a speed that was utterly beyond his expectations. Considering the talent that Zen currently had, the Cyan Dragon could easily give him a positive review. Being an everlasting creature, the dragon had come across too many geniuses, too many to find anyone that was truly special. Thus, praise from the Cyan Dragon was more than enough to prove Zen's outstanding gift. What was more, the Cyan Dragon could tell that the kid's potential was even growing further. Perhaps, one day, the dragon would no longer find it proper to regard Zen with a mere, pretty good. Without another word, Zen continued to climb the mountain from halfway. When he approached the low-grade mysterious sword that the demon knight left behind, the seemingly ordinary sword abruptly shot out a jet of sharp sword intent. It was utterly murderous. Like a god of death, it hacked relentlessly at Zen's head. No sword spirit has been fostered yet. Even though the Cyan Dragon said the demon knight was extremely powerful, it's still hardly possible to foster a sword spirit with a low-grade mysterious weapon. Even without sword spirit, this sword intent is already way too fierce. Without hesitation, Zen swiftly activated the phoenix crystal in his right arm. The streamer sword he was holding transformed into an assemblage of silver flowers, each containing a trace of sharp sword intent. Clank, clank, clank. It was only when he launched 10 strikes with his sword that Zen was able to get the ferocious sword intent smashed. Despite his frantic strikes, the demon knight's sword still buzzed in a frenzy for a while as if it was unwilling to admit its defeat. Eventually, it quieted down and a ball of scarlet sword spirit escaped the object. It was extremely small, the size of a rice grain, perhaps, and far too small compared to the sword spirits Zen had seen before. In the past, when Zen destroyed similar matured swords, usually, hundreds of sword spirits would come fluttering out from the weapon, each much larger than the scarlet one before him. But when the rice grain-sized sword spirit shot straight into Zen's body, he instantly sensed a special change stirring inside him. Since the spirit was rife with intent for killing, the bloodthirsty aura soon contaminated the sword spirits Zen had acquired. His spirits came in various colors, but they could not mix together. Without a way to utilize them, Zen had no choice but to merely store them inside his body. However, after this scarlet sword spirit injected itself inside him, its strong intent for killing infected all the rest of the spirits. The colors of the sword spirits began to shift gradually. Whether they were black, yellow, or blue, every single sword spirit turned red and merged together. As they mixed together, they began to form a single figure, a human form. This is sword spirit transformation. The huge Cyan dragon in Zen's mind stirred with excitement. It should be noted that few things in this world could thrill a dragon. It wasn't Zen's great strength that got the creature pumped up but the fact that he had transformed his sword spirits within such a short time. Even the Cyan dragon, who had met numerous geniuses and talents, found the moment to be surreal. It happened too soon, didn't it? How did it turn out like this? It should be impossible. Indeed, Zen has collected many sword spirits along the way up the Killing Sword Mountain, but it should have taken him a long time to combine the spirits into one. That has nothing to do with his talent, it's just the way of the sword spirits. Nobody can simply cut corners when fostering them. It's bound to be a dull and lengthy process. One should have to go through the absorbing and merging process over and over again. Each merging can take years. And he must continue doing it until the sword spirits mature. But how long did it take Zen? He merged his sword spirits shortly after he stepped onto the Killing Sword Mountain. Impossible. Leaning against the smelting furnace, the colossal Cyan dragon quietly observed the merging of sword spirits within Zen. Before this moment, he had kept disheartening the boy. No matter how extraordinary he was, he could hardly gain the recognition of the dragon. After all, the geniuses the creature had met were indescribable in the words of mankind. But not even the dragon could disregard the rapid fusion of the sword spirits. Surprising a dragon was already something Zen could brag about for a lifetime. However, at that moment, he paid no attention to the Cyan dragon as he focused all his attention on the ongoing change in his body. The sword spirits kept gradually merging together. Slowly, the head appeared, then the trunk, the arms, the legs. In the beginning, the figure's outline was very fuzzy, like a clay figurine shaped by an amateur. Soon after, it grew more and more detailed and distinctive. First came the figure's chest. The originally flat surface swelled up into 2 plump breasts, leaving Zen dumbstruck. Goodness, why did the sword spirits turn into a shape like this? The absurd change was truly astounding. Its arms grew slimmer and slimmer until they were as thin as a lotus root. At last, the sword spirits turned into an exquisitely carved woman. Her garments, facial features, and eyes immediately came into being. Undoubtedly, the woman was extremely gorgeous. But her eyes were as sharp as a knife, which made her look like a volcano about to erupt. In spite of the fact that she was just conjured by sword spirits, her appearance was of utmost beauty. The murderous air she was emitting was exactly the same as that of the rice grain-sized sword spirit. What on earth is going on? I've never seen this woman, so why have my sword spirits transformed into such a shape? Zen was left utterly bewildered. Staring at this beautiful human-shaped sword spirit, Zen just couldn't figure it out. If he could choose, he certainly wouldn't let his sword spirits transform into a woman, it was too awkward. The problem was that the transformation of sword spirits was very different from the transformation of life vitality. Life vitality's transformation was shaped by the practitioner's subjective mind. Sometimes, when a practitioner was halfway through the process and was unsatisfied with the figure, he could easily undo it and begin reshaping life vitality in his mind again. It wasn't a big deal, and many people were capable of doing it. However, the shape of sword spirits was not up to the practitioner himself. Instead, it was formed by the many sword spirits inside the practitioner at the specific time it was being shaped. Thus, the practitioner had no control over its shape. At the sight of Zen's baffled look, the Cyan Dragon snickered. Cyan Dragon, what is happening? Not understanding why it turned out like this, Zen had to ask the dragon. If I'm not mistaken, this woman your sword spirits turned into is the owner of that sword, the dragon replied blandly. Ah, no way. At the dragon's explanation, Zen turned pale with fright. The demon knight aren't human beings, are they? Why does she look like this? Even fairer than humankind. By men's aesthetic standard, this woman constituted by all the sword spirits looked nearly perfect at every angle. Zen's experiences had brought him face to face with demons, ogres, and the like. The appearance of ogres was fairly acceptable to Zen. As for the demons he ran up against in the White Emperor City, well, that picture was too horrible. If a weak-hearted man glanced at it, he would probably have nightmares. When Zen heard about this race from the Cyan Dragon, he thought that since it was called the demon knight, they should look like the demons he was used to facing, perhaps with more mouths or pairs of eyes. To his total astonishment, this woman from the demon knight was utterly gorgeous. She was even more impeccable than human beings in several aspects. Chapter 288, Killing Way. The girl could be described as perfect in every sense. But Zen, ever so keen, noted there were still slight differences between the girl and ordinary human beings. Her ears, for one, were unusual. These were long and slender, and unlike most ears, their top had an acute angular shape. Instead of human ears, hers resembled those of a cat's. Still, the girl appeared quite charming. Another distinction was her legs or the length of them. Hers were longer than most women's, but went perfectly with the rest of her body. Who set the rules anyway that only a human being can look this way? Demon Knight has always been like this. In their eyes, it is the human beings who have the similar appearance to theirs, the Cyan Dragon said slowly. This girl is actually alive, isn't she? Zen wondered aloud. His mind was full of questions, but this was the first he voiced out. The Cyan Dragon nodded and replied, each sword in the Killing Sword Mountain has an owner, and all the owners are alive. In case anyone dies, their swords will be buried deep in the mountain. Since the woman's sword is here, she is probably somewhere out in the world. At the Cyan Dragon's words, Zen stared at the girl with a weird expression on his face. That meant his sword spirit had transformed into a girl of Demon Knight for some unknown reason. How would it be if he met the real person in the future? Of course, the likelihood of that ever happening was very small. According to the Cyan Dragon, Demon Knight did not exist in the same world inhabited by Zen. I would like to name my sword spirit Lily, he said with a smile. There was a slightly whimsical tone in his voice. Cultivating his sword spirit in such a short time was a big help in boosting Zen's strength. At least the sword spirit could serve as a support, helping Zen go further up on the Killing Sword Mountain. It was a spiritual connection that Zen had with his sword spirit, so he had complete control of her, including her thoughts. As soon as Zen came up with a thought, she would do it as he expected. In a sense, the sword spirit was part of the disciple's being. If Zen gave a sword to her, an enemy would be practically fighting against two people. And the sword spirit could do so much more than fight. Some skills of the double sword system required the sword spirit to engage in combat. But Zen usually did not choose to do this in most circumstances. He preferred to integrate the sword spirit with his streamer sword. When the sword spirit integrated with the streamer sword, a red light would appear on the surface of the weapon and release a strong killing intent. Breathing deeply, Zen thought, the mountain is called Killing Sword Mountain. So it is intended to cultivate martial artists with killing skills. I didn't choose the way of cultivating my sword skills before. But I'm now walking the killing way without realizing it. He stared intently at the streamer sword with a powerful killing aura in his hand. He kept thinking, killing is not a bad thing. It is an important method to show and uphold justice. It is said to prevent violence through violence. That should be the real meaning of the killing way of practicing sword skills. After a while, Zen got ready to continue and left behind the sword of the demon knight. Covered by the sword spirit, his streamer sword gained at least 40% more power. Thousands of fairy weapons were stuck on the mountainside. Even when facing mature sword spirits, Zen easily defeated them. He climbed even faster than before. Soon, Zen came to the edge of the mountainside and didn't even feel slightly tired. A road appeared before him on the mountain ridge. Then he saw a blue sword blocking his way. Luxurious best described the sword. Black silk was used to cover its handle, adorned by a 5-colored tassel. The entire metal blade looked so intricate, yet it was very striking. The sword's body, meanwhile, was shining and gave off blue light. There were even icy crystals on the blade's surface that waved gracefully. It truly looked magnificent. It was Zen's first time to see a sacred weapon such as this. It was at the lower grade of a sacred weapon. The disciple understood that it was not a real sacred weapon. The sword was merely a shadow while the actual sword was still in its owner's hand. As Zen drew closer to the sword, the weapon suddenly quivered. Soon the sword was being pulled out of the ground, and a light blue figure stood in its place. The figure now held a sword and pointed it at Zen. Mumbling to himself, Zen said, "The same thing is happening like that in the fairy weapon area. It is only a more mature sword spirit. The only difference is that the low-grade sacred weapon is much stronger than a fairy weapon." Staring intently at the blue shadow, he raised his streamer sword and pointed it at the image, ready to kill any time. But before Zen could even move, a hint of hesitation made him suddenly stop. There was something quite strange here. This sword spirit seemed to be different from the others he previously encountered. It wasn't a mystical thing like other spirits but seemed to have a life of its own. And then the sword spirit opened its mouth and began to talk. "What? A young man at the 2nd grade of the nature level can break into the mountain ridge?" The blue figure spoke with a tone of disbelief. Taken aback, Zen raised his eyebrows in question while keeping the sword in his hand. This time, he spoke, "You're just a sword spirit. Why can you talk? You look like there's some part of your soul there." This figure amazed Zen. He had killed so many mature sword spirits, some of whom could shape themselves. But all of them only had dull appearances. While they were extremely competent in the practice of sword skills, Zen still managed to defeat them because they couldn't think for themselves. But this blue figure standing before him could not only talk but even feel surprised. Apparently, it had a soul, however little, and a mind of its own. "I can't understand it. How a person at grade 2 of the nature level can successfully pass the mountainside and end up here." The blue figure looked confused, and his brows furrowed with concern. Inhaling, he said, "But this is the end of your climb. You can stick your sword here. There is no place for your weapon if you go farther." Everyone aspired to stick their sword in a higher place. Because the higher the ground where it was embedded, the more resources a person could collect from the Killing Sword Mountain. However, resources of the Killing Sword Mountain were limited. The situation was no different from that of the Cloud Sect. And this was why all the weapons at the foot of the mountain, including mysterious, spiritual, and fairy weapons, would release their sword spirits to prevent other climbers. One could only climb the mountain step by step using his own strength until he reached a higher place. That was the way to obtain more resources. The blue figure's remarks had Zen raising his eyebrows while his face became long with worry. Grateful to be given the opportunity to reach the Killing Sword Mountain, Zen vowed to climb as high as possible. He had been fighting hard to pass the mountainside with the help of the sword spirit. Why would he stop here? If a man could have a sacred weapon, even a low-level one, it was impossible for Zen to defeat him in real life. And even someone like Kenneth Shi, who was the head of the Cloud Sect, strong as he was, could not beat such a man in their real world. But this was the Killing Sword Mountain now. What the man actually had was only a sword and a small part of his soul. How could Zen back off from here? "I don't want to stick my sword here. I have a higher target," Zen declared. A smile formed on the blue figure's face. "You have a higher goal. You, a young man at grade 2 of the nature level." "I was aiming for the top of the Killing Sword Mountain. But I discovered I was not as strong as I had expected and had to stick my sword here." "Do you think you are stronger than I am?" "You will have your answer once we test our strengths," Zen quickly answered. Since he was merely a part of a soul, Zen didn't want to talk anymore. He was ready to fight. The blue figure smiled and said, "Your arrival here did surprise me since you're only grade 2 of the nature level. More importantly, you have your own sword spirit. Is this your first time coming to the Killing Sword Mountain? I am a man on the ice sword, named Iceni. I really admire your talent. But this will not change the outcome. I am at a level much higher than yours, and what I have learned about sword skills is far greater than what you know. After he finished saying this, Iceni waved his sword towards Zen. Clink, two swords smashed into one another. Technically, Zen's sword, which was a low-level fairy weapon, should not be able to hit a sacred weapon. There was a huge gap between his sword and that of the blue figures. But because a sword spirit covered Zen's sword, its strength was greatly enhanced. It was this that enabled him to attack a sacred weapon, like that of the blue figures, even with just a fairy weapon. After only one round, the blue figure spoke again in surprise, "Oh. You have become adept at the basic sword skill." "No, not just adept. But your sword skill seems to have been enhanced." "How can that happen? How can you simplify it to such extent?" The blue figure's face registered astonishment that seemed to say he did not understand Zen's sword skill at all. Each warrior who could impel his sword on the grounds of the Killing Sword Mountain was a talent on his way to cultivate further sword skills. Of course, there were still distinctions among talented people. For instance, some men only came to the Killing Sword Mountain once, right after learning the consummation of sword intent the first time, but some others could do it a second time as they went further and progressed to a level higher than the consummation of sword intent. There were many fanatics of sword skills, who were fascinated by all types of sword skills. Apparently, the basic sword skill Zen used just now managed to attract the blue figure. Interesting. Wonderful. A basic sword skill can have such great power. It's true that the world is so big that nothing is surprising anymore. A young man like you can master such an amazing basic sword skill. I know now how you've gotten this far on the mountain. The blue figure spoke to Zen. Waving his sword simultaneously, he continued, "But I will not let you go on. There is no place for you up there." Impatience had Zen replying, "You keep mentioning grade 2 of the nature level. How about you in the real world? You're only a piece of a broken soul with a spirit. I also have my sword spirit, yet I am here completely. Are you so sure you can prevent me from going on?" With a cold smile, the young disciple started to stir his sword. He refused to listen to the garrulous blue figure. What he wanted was to cut this blue image and its sword spirit into pieces as soon as possible. "You arrogant young man, I have lived hundreds of years and practiced sword skills for as many years. My understanding of sword skills is beyond your imagination or comprehension. I am strong enough to stop you." Suddenly, there appeared a bright blue light from the sword of the blue figure. Together with the bright blue light were cold currents. With the metal blade completely wrapped in icy currents, it was freezing but gave off an extreme killing intent. With just enough arrogance, Zen sneered at the blue figure and remarked, "After hundreds of years, you're still here on the edge of the mountain ridge. Your strength is just so-so." Without warning, Zen used his sword spirit. And instantly, Zen's streamer sword produced a strong killing intent. And this one seemed to have the sense of torture. Chapter 289, The Cheating. Killing aura was also referred to as the malicious aura. The gestures and expressions of soldiers and bandits, who had killed many people with their swords and knives, were filled with a malicious aura. As they had murdered numerous people, they were bound to be tainted with this killing aura. Sometimes, the killing aura was so powerful that it could confuse the human mind and distract them on the battlefield. If a person were corrupted with an intense killing aura, it would negatively affect his martial arts cultivation. At a critical time, that person could also be possessed by his inner demon and be trapped in the endless thought of killing methods forever. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Trent Yu. He hailed from the Yu clan, one of the top 7 noble clans in the eastern region. Trent Yu practiced these killing methods. As he increased his practice in killing methods, Trent Yu's character turned increasingly cruel, and his killing means also became more vicious. In a short while, he had massacred innumerable people at random. At first, the Yu clan protected Trent Yu. After all, at that time, all things were dominated by power and strength, and the practice of killing methods had obvious benefits to the promotion of strength. In fact, its power was extremely terrifying. According to Trent Yu's growth rate, he would soon become the backbone of the Yu clan. Therefore, they allowed Trent Yu to kill randomly. However, as time went by, Trent Yu killed more and more people, and once, he even killed 2 men from the Yu clan. Then, the members of the Yu clan realized that Trent Yu had gone crazy and that the killing aura had entirely dominated him. He had, by then, become an egoistic killing machine. Sadly, by the time they learned of the facts, it was already too late. The power of the Yu clan was insufficient to arrest Trent Yu. Thus, the Yu clan united with the other 6 top noble clans to carry out the encirclement and arrest of Trent Yu. However, he killed a majority of the members who had volunteered to help. This act, in turn, increased his killing aura. After that, Trent Yu only continued to grow stronger. Finally, Cloud Sect was alerted. As a result, the sect immediately issued a hunting order and sent its top 10 saints, and 3 elders to hunt him. Nevertheless, despite being hunted by so many powerful masters, Trent Yu managed to escape. At that time, Trent Yu was considered a murderous demon in the eastern region. While he was on the run, he kept killing innocent people. No matter which prefecture and county he fled to, Trent Yu would massacre people to cultivate his killing aura. This man had become a nightmare for all the people in the eastern region. Even the leaders of Cloud Sect felt as though they were at their wits' end and that they had no way to deal with Trent. At this time, Trent Yu went missing. No one knew where he was and why he had disappeared. Many people guessed that either Trent Yu was hiding somewhere to escape being hunted or he was practicing his killing methods in a hidden corner. 3 years passed, and no one had any information about Trent Yu. Until one day, a woodcutter in the W County found Trent Yu's remains and his bloodstained sword when he was on the way to a mountain to cut wood. It turned out that Trent Yu was not hiding. Instead, while practicing, he had been possessed by his inner spirit demon. As a result, he had gone mad and been killed by his killing aura. There is a proverb that says, "As a man sows, so shall he reap." Although the practice of the killing method could sharply improve a person's martial arts, its deadly side effect was that the power was so strong it was beyond a person's ability to control it. Trent Yu had killed too many people with his sword, and it was bound to bring him bad karma. The killing aura was indeed Trent Yu's greatest strength, but it was also his biggest nemesis, one that could kill him. Zen did not choose the killing way to practice his sword skills. However, it was fate that led him to figure out the sword intent at the consummation grade. For the same reason, he unwittingly entered the killing sword mountain. Or, the unfathomable god of fate gave Zen a hint that sooner or later he would go on the path of killing, which was why it was arranged for him to enter the killing sword mountain. The killing sword mountain was a sacred place for swordsmen. It was one of the 3 swordplay holy lands. As it was a sacred place for trillions of living creatures, only a few lucky people would be chosen to enter. So, the killing sword mountain was of great use to swordsmen. As long as the swordsman inserted his sword into the killing sword mountain, he could establish a connection with it, release his killing aura, and deposit it in the special place of the killing sword mountain. That way, he would not be subjected to the attack of the killing aura during his practice. And when the swordsman needed the killing aura, he could get it back from the killing sword mountain. The killing sword mountain was like a bank where a person could deposit and withdraw his killing aura, kind of like real banks in the eastern region where a person could deposit and withdraw cubic crystals. Also, according to the rules of the killing sword mountain, the higher the place where the sword was inserted, the more malicious aura the swordsman could deposit and withdraw. It was necessary to know that the killing aura was a very valuable asset, and it was also called the malicious aura. When it was used to drive many cultivation methods, it would significantly improve a disciple's power. Especially when a disciple was practicing a unique cultivation method that would use malicious aura, it would generate an oddly good effect. For example, if a streak of malicious aura could increase the power of a cultivation method by 1 degree, then 2 streaks could double the power of the cultivation method, and so on. However, there was always a limit to the malicious aura owned by disciples who practiced the killing method. Moreover, they needed to be careful about being attacked by the malicious aura and to prevent themselves from being controlled by their inner spirit demon. Therefore, the practice of killing method was regarded as a double-edged sword. Powerful though it was, it could at any moment cause damage to anyone who practiced it. However, the swordsman who entered the killing sword mountain was able to store his malicious aura in it. In this way, he could avoid the damage caused by the malicious aura, which was the main purpose of the killing sword mountain. It was also the reason why the killing sword mountain was considered a sacred place for swordsmen. The lucky swordsman, who inserted his sword into a place of high altitude, could deposit and withdraw more malicious aura. This was Zen's first time at the killing sword mountain. To be able to enter killing sword mountain was already a matter of great luck for him. It was unknown whether he would be able to enter the killing sword mountain again. Maybe a person only got one opportunity to access the mountain. It was possible that even after making a huge breakthrough, Zen might not be able to enter the killing sword mountain. Just like the Iceni, an ice sword master, perhaps his strength was now very strong, and according to general knowledge, he was supposed to insert his sacred weapon higher than on the edge of the ridge. However, he did not get the chance to enter the Killing Sword Mountain, so his sacred weapon could only be firmly inserted on the edge of the ridge, without any higher improvement. So this time, Zen was determined to insert his sword in a higher place. When attacked by the spirit of the sacred weapon, Zen did not reserve his strength. He exercised his highest martial arts and top-grade weapon. The people who owned sacred weapons were influential enough to rule a region. According to Zen, Iceni might have had strength equivalent to that of people like the top leader of the Cloud Hall. Even if the sacred weapon contained the sword spirit and only a little of Iceni's spirit, it would be difficult for Zen to defeat him even after employing all his skills. Ice freeze all. Just watch me freeze you, Iceni's spirit said arrogantly. Then, he summoned the sword spirit to attack Zen. As soon as the sword attack was launched, Zen felt cold. Even his consciousness seemed to be freezing. His surrounding space was filled with a chill, and he could see ice crystals forming. Zen was not afraid of fire and heat as his body could resist different kinds of flames. However, there was no way for him to deal with the cold. As he was surrounded by such extreme cold, his speed was significantly reduced, and he had no way to fight harder. Lift up the sword, Zen said quickly. With his sword lifted, soon, the malicious aura of his sword spirit, Lily, was released. That malicious aura turned into pieces of silk thread and split the ice crystals in an instant. With the help of the malicious aura, Zen's sword broke Iceni's cold attack. That's impossible. Your malicious aura can't be so strong, Iceni's spirit said, startled. Since Iceni was able to step into Killing Sword Mountain and he also practiced killing swordplay, he had a thorough understanding of the malicious aura. The malicious aura in Zen's body was not strong at all, but the malicious aura in his sword was powerful. What Iceni didn't know was that Zen's sword spirit had just been condensed and that the malicious aura was not Zen's, but from his sword spirit, Lily. Poof! Snap, 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 the sound of something breaking echoed across the mountain. After Zen broke Iceni's extreme cold attack, he lunged his sword toward Iceni's spirit. The sound of shattering glass reverberated through the mountain as Iceni's spirit had been pierced by the sword. Soon afterward, the sacred weapon returned to its original place, and a large number of blue light spots gushed out of the sacred weapon and flew into Zen's body. This killing aura, or malicious aura, is so powerful. No wonder the woman from the Demon Knight could carry a low-grade mysterious weapon up the mountainside, Zen muttered in excitement. He now finally understood that she could insert such a low-grade mysterious weapon in the mountainside because she relied on her extraordinarily strong malicious aura. If that is so, then the Killing Sword Mountain will be beneficial to me. Should I insert my sword in it now? Zen mumbled as he thought of the possibilities. Since he had defeated Iceni's spirit, Zen now crossed over the mountainside and stood on the ridge, a level higher than before. He looked up and found that although there were not many sacred weapons, as compared to the number of fairy weapons, the number of sacred weapons in front of him was enough to make him skeptical. Since Iceni's sword spirit, hidden in the first sacred weapon he encountered, was so powerful, it was not hard to imagine how much stronger the sword spirits from other sacred weapons would be. Zen, I think today's progress is enough. It is truly amazing that you were able to reach the ridge. The Killing Sword Mountain is filled with countless talents, and the master of every sword you see is a talented swordsman. These masters have figured out the sword intent at the consummation grade. You only have the strength of a cultivator at the second grade of the nature level. Now, you are able to break through these barriers and insert your fairy weapon alongside these sacred weapons. This is an outstanding achievement, the Cyan Dragon said slowly. Equally, I am afraid that you won't be able to defeat the next sword no matter how hard you try. A sacred weapon not far from Zen flashed a golden light. It was a broad-edged sword that was wider than Zen's body and over 7 feet long. To be able to handle such a sword, the master must be a colossus. What stressed Zen more was that on the surface of the broad-edged sword, there was still a hint of reddish energy. If Zen guessed correctly, that energy would be malicious aura that had been compressed to an extreme extent. Even a simple glimpse of the sword was terrifying to Zen. Zen was self-aware. He knew that with his current strength and the malicious aura of his sword spirit, he was able to defeat Iceni's sword spirit and to walk up the ridge. Indeed, this was a good result and perhaps, the best he could do at the moment. However, Zen did not seem to be ready to stop at this point. He took 2 steps back and gripped the streamer sword firmly. Then, with a deep breath, he sprinted forward. Zen, oh, my, the cyan dragon in Zen's mind said helplessly. He knew exactly what Zen was planning on doing. Since he hadn't made a successful breakthrough, Zen threw his sword forward hard. Chapter 290, Sword Washing Pool. The higher one could insert his sword in the mountain, the greater his benefit would be. It wasn't easy though. Anyone who came here would obviously try his best and insert the sword at the top of the Killing Sword Mountain. This would ensure maximum benefit, but only if it was so easy. One needed to go through several challenges to defeat the sword intent hidden in those swords. There was only one path to the top of the mountain, and the sword intents were on that path. Zen had to defeat them. However, he clearly knew that he couldn't win over the sword spirit of next sword, as it was too powerful, so his only option was to throw the sword to the mountaintop. This was a mystical area and no one knew whether Zen was the first person to do so since the Killing Sword Mountain had been made. However, if he had succeeded, his sword would have landed higher in the mountain. Deciding that throwing was his only option, he chose it. Zen was born with superhuman strengths. When he threw his sword, he also activated all the power in the dragon's scales. The streamer sword, under his power and the dragon's too, drew a bright silver arc of light in the air as it hurled in a parabolic path, almost like a meteor streaking over countless sacred weapons. It soared upwards and far. With the extreme initial velocity, it took the sword 3 breaths of time to lose its upward power and begin falling towards the earth. Then it slammed into the middle of the mountain ridge, where the top-grade sacred weapons were stuck. As a lower-grade fairy weapon, the streamer sword was clearly visible among them, like a lion in a zebra herd. Seeing this scene, the cyan dragon paused for a moment, too astonished to speak. The Killing Sword Mountain was a special sacred place and it had its own rules, which everyone had to follow. Breaking them would mean immediate expulsion. Powerful as the cyan dragon was, he dared not to help Zen from the beginning to the end lest he broke the rules and was punished. And Zen's sword throw made him worry that the idea might violate the rules of the Killing Sword Mountain. If the Killing Sword Mountain did not acknowledge Zen's sword inserted in such a manner, the sword would bounce back. He was even more afraid that Zen would be expelled directly from the Killing Sword Mountain for this reason. But Zen's sword was safely inserted into the mountain ridge. Then it emitted soft splendor, which demonstrated that it was establishing a connection with Zen. Obviously, Zen's sword had been recognized by the Killing Sword Mountain. He did not need to reach there himself. Only his sword did. Did that really work? I totally did not see that coming. Whatever had just happened went way over the cyan dragon's head. He had lived for hundreds of thousands of years and was much older than Zen, but he suddenly found that Zen had refreshed some of his ideas. To be honest, Zen had just wanted to try the idea and see whether reaching higher in such a manner was acceptable or not. He hadn't expected it to actually work. It was a pity that he was not strong enough. If he had been stronger and with enough brawn, maybe he could have thrown his sword right to the top of the mountain, where it could stay among the divine weapons or perhaps some even higher ranks of the weapons. Of course he knew that he couldn't be too greedy. The streamer sword had landed in a fairly good spot which far exceeded his expectations. After the streamer sword lodged itself into the ridges of the Killing Sword Mountain, Zen suddenly felt some changes taking place in his body. There was a very special feeling in his mind, as if he was beginning to get connected with this huge sword mountain. As if he could talk to it. An invisible passage seemed to have been formed between his body and the Killing Sword Mountain which could let him reach higher places. Suddenly, before Zen could carefully understand and analyze that feeling, the Killing Sword Mountain collapsed out of the blue in front of his eyes. With the loss of the whole world of the Killing Sword Mountain, his consciousness retreated from it immediately and he found himself back in the arena. When his consciousness returned, the cyan dragon smiled and told him, "I'm so impressed. It really surprised me when you were able to throw and lodge the sword so high. This way of killing is a good way to be strong, so make good use of it. Now, I've done enough, and I feel like taking a nap. Bye." Even though the cyan dragon had devoured a piece of dragon bone spear earlier on, he hadn't received much energy from that. After all, the dragon bone spear was too small for a gigantic genuine dragon. As the cyan dragon gradually fell asleep, Zen opened his eyes and woke up. Zen is awake. He's awake. Finally. Now some action. It took him so long to learn the consummate sword intent. Hey wait, Rocher hasn't woken up yet. It's taking him longer. Zen glanced at Rocher who was sitting close by. His eyes were still shut and he didn't seem to have retreated from whatever place he had gone to yet. According to the Cyan Dragon, in the moment of understanding the consummate sword intent, Rocher would have been sent to another place in order to be tested and granted new skills. The Killing Sword Mountain was only one of the several hundred sacred cultivation places in the world. He couldn't know where Rocher had been taken and why he hadn't woken up yet. However, just at that moment, Rocher opened his eyes suddenly. As his eyelids flickered and his pupils came into focus, there was a sudden outbreak of fierce sword intent from his body. It formed a huge cyclone into the sky, and several flashes of terrible lightning and thunder loomed into the air, traveling across the cyclone. Is there a kind of thunder power in Rocher's sword intent? Zen's eyes narrowed slightly, a little surprised. The blue lightning Rocher was emitting seemed quite powerful. Combined with Rocher's sword intent, the lightning was emitting a faint trace of natural law. It looks so powerful, almost like true lightning in the sky. Alas, I envy Rocher having such a great opportunity. He had an enormous breakthrough and all he did was sitting there for 2 hours. How do I find myself opportunities like that? Don't even think about it. You wouldn't be able to catch up with him even if he hadn't mastered the consummate sword intent. Now he is even more powerful. Would you look at that? Zen has also grasped the consummate sword intent, but he seems to have gained less power. When he woke up, he didn't burst out such an eye-catching effect. Zen smiled as he heard the audience's remarks. The greatest gain he had achieved in his epiphanic state was to establish a connection with the Killing Sword Mountain. This wouldn't have been visible immediately to the audience, but he would feel the effects. After he had practiced the killing sword skill, the benefits of that connection would appear and increase gradually. His second greatest gain was the sword spirit. Born with powerful malicious aura, Lily had now become a great battle force that Zen could rely on as soon as she came into being. But he hadn't let Lily appear in front of the public just yet. She was hidden inside Zen's mind, and her aura naturally did not spill over. Therefore, no one noticed that there was an entirely new person hidden inside him. Rocher's sword intent overflowed for a long time, and then slowly calmed and restored. Rocher took a deep breath and let it out slowly. A peaceful and delighted smile appeared on his face. With Rocher's grave character, such a happy expression could indicate only one thing, that he had gained a lot in his sleep. That he had. As soon as he had understood the consummate sword intent, he had been pulled into a place called the Sword Washing Pool. As someone who was crazy about swords and intents and legends, Rocher had paid special attention to the stories of the masters. The sword washing pool had been mentioned in a book he had read. The book had said it was a semi-holy place. So, on finding himself granted an opportunity to go into the sword washing pool, how could he restrain his excitement? After all, only a very small number of people among the tens of millions of swordsmen would have received such an opportunity. Not everyone would have managed to perfect the sword intent, and even if they did, they weren't sure to be allowed to enter the semi-holy land to improve their sword intent. Cultivating in the sword washing pool could not only improve his sword intent, but could also add a special attribute to it. So Rocher had dipped his sword into the sword washing pool and began to practice his intent. After a long time, changes had taken place in the sword washing pool. The water of the pool had emitted glaring blue thunder and lightning, which had poured crazily into Rocher's body and his blood-corroding sword. In the end, the thunder and lightning had merged with his sword intent, granting it several new powers. With that in his mind, he had named his new sword intent as the Extreme Thunder Sword Intent. Thunder and lightning was a kind of natural phenomenon, which was also seen as a divine punishment. The heavenly sword Rocher was practicing was already powerful in attack. Now its attack was greater after being mixed with the strong natural powers of the world. Thunder and lightning could have dealt catastrophic damage to his opponents. It was quite obvious that the Extreme Thunder Sword Intent could enhance Rocher's fighting capability greatly. Congratulations, Rocher, it looks like you got a great opportunity in your state of epiphany. Zen congratulated him with a smile. Rocher nodded. He didn't need to be modest. To be able to cultivate in the legendary semi-holy place was enough for him to show off his good fortune. The person with such kind of good fortunes was favored by the heavens and was destined to be a great man. There wouldn't be a second one for 1,000 years in the whole eastern region. If he continued to be modest, it would be hypocritical in nature. I tried my best in my last attack, but I still couldn't defeat you. That means I have already lost the game, Rocher said slowly. But since both of us understood the consummate sword intent at the same time, the battle had to be suspended in between. With that situation taken care of, I want to challenge you once again with both of us at a higher level of swordsmanship now. Zen nodded when he heard Rocher's words. Okay, I accept your challenge. Let's see who wins the final battle. The disciples of Cloud Sect had been sitting in their places for more than 2 hours, waiting for Zen and Rocher to complete their epiphany. They were all quite bored now. Those who had been watching through the picture slab were in a slightly better state. They could have left the picture slab for a while to do what they wanted to do when there was nothing interesting to see. But those on the scene of all peak competition were unable to do so. This naturally meant that as soon as they heard Rocher say that he had lost, they were fired in anger and ready to swear and shout. We have been waiting for you for so long and all you can do is admit defeat. Boo, are you kidding? Then they heard Rocher say that he would challenge Zen once again. They cheered at once. The heavenly sword of Rocher had been so powerful. Now that he had understood the consummate sword intent and there was an additional thunder and lightning power in his sword, how strong could he be now? That remained to be seen, but one thing was clear, there was going to be much flash and much bang now in the arena. Can he defeat Zen and turn him into a piece of lightning-struck burnt wood with his sword? One of the disciples asked. I am not sure whether he will chop Zen into burnt wood pieces or not. But I can say for certain that Zen is a difficult opponent to deal with, answered another. Yes, you know, I used to think that Zen would defeat Rocher easily. But it's hard to say now. Obviously, both of them have grasped the consummate sword intent. But Rocher seems to have gained more benefits than Zen did. When Zen woke up from the epiphany, he showed no signs of a sharp increase in strength. And Rocher emitted lightning himself. It seems that Zen has clearly not gained much from the epiphany, a third one remarked. The state of epiphany was a great opportunity for the martial art refiners, but not everyone was sure to reap remarkable benefits from it. Anything could happen in that state. Sometimes, people entered the state of epiphany, but ended up getting nothing helpful from it. Stories like this could be found everywhere. Rocher raised his blood-corroding sword slightly. After he had understood the consummate sword intent, every sword cyclone around him was more and more aggressive now, and there was a trace of thunder and lightning hidden inside them. Rocher knew clearly that the power of thunder and lightning he had obtained from the sword-washing pool was by no means ordinary. They were definitely more powerful than any mortal man could imagine. He was confident that he could defeat Zen this time. As Rocher was building up the power of his sword with full confidence, Zen called upon the sword spirit in his mind. Lily faded into existence gradually at his side. Wait, what? There is another person inside the arena. And she is a beauty. Where did she come from? What happened? What's going on? A disciple shouted out uncontrollably. Chapter 291. Follow the genius, steps. Lily's features and appearance weren't consistent with an average person. Her hair looked softer, and there was a fresh and young aura about her with a cropped beveled fringe. Under those soft thin locks of hair resided her white and delicate face. With all parts of her face exactly matching with each other, she was highly attractive and beautiful. Right now, her pretty face was expressionless. But it could be imagined just how charming she would be if she started smiling. Her costume was completely different from what was usually worn in the eastern region. Even the central region wouldn't have been bold enough like her. Unlike the conservative style of women across those regions, her dress style was much more open and bolder. For example, the upper armor she wore only covered her upper chest, showing her good figure and shape. Her bare waist looked even more slender under the armor she wore. Her long and slender legs were also visible in the short dress she wore. Even though her height was similar to that of Zen, she looked taller because of the differing ratios of their figures and her slender legs. It had to be said that Lily, with her amazing figure and remarkable face, had perfectly copied the appearance of that lady from the Demon Knight. She looked vividly beautiful even with her stiff expression. Almost every single member of the audience was baffled by her good looks and sudden appearance. Instead of trying to venture a guess to the identity of this beautiful lady, they were confused about from where this lady had come from. There were also several spectators who were following the competition from outside the arena. For example, in Lady Peak, a large picture slab had been kept in the center of the hall. Normally, the female disciples of Cloud Sect were more fastidious about their environment than male disciples. An example of it could be seen at Drizzle Peak, where the disciples had just put the picture slab on the muster station. The muster station was full of dust, but they didn't mind and were now around the slab to see the direct broadcast of the competition. On the contrary, the female disciples of Lady Peak had cleaned the hall and put pieces of cushions around the picture slab. They had also prepared many snacks, such as spiced nuts, green tea melon seeds, and so on to enjoy along with the fight. It was almost as if movie night was going on. All the disciples were sitting around the slab, gossiping and eating as they enjoyed the All Peaks competition. Among them, Nina was leaning on a cushion and her eyes were closely following Zen's figure. Sometimes, she would sit straight when Zen's rivals were strong. Her only focus was Zen and she had watched all his competitions. Some of her close friends knew clearly what was going on in her mind. Therefore, at the beginning, they had made jokes at her. Oh sorry, her dear Zen wins again. Even though Nina had pretended to be angry at the jokes, she had actually felt warm and happy and was blushing in her heart. The thinking of young girls was sometimes just simple and direct. However, with the rapid rise of Zen's rank in the All Peaks competition and his unexpected performance, he had attracted the attentions of the entire Cloud sect, including most of the female disciples. Some special meanings had added themselves to their eyesight, or rather, their gazes. Obviously, all the young ladies wanted to love and be loved. The meteoric rise meant that Zen's status was constantly rising in the eyes of those female disciples. A character like Zen was sure to have a brilliant future. Because of this change, Nina's friends had stopped making jokes about Zen and her and focused on the competition now. The world of martial artists might sometimes be very warm, but most of the time, its occupants were snobbish and realistic. Both Nina's appearance and family background could have been easily ranked as top level in the whole eastern region. Many people had adored her as an unreachable goddess. They had not even dared to dream of dating her simply because of the big gap between their normal life and this goddess life. In that way, one could even consider Nina and Zen the perfect match. One had a beautiful appearance and a notable family background, while the other was a gifted, brilliant, and talented disciple. However, since Zen was not from a noble clan, it would have seemed that he was inferior to Nina. But with Zen's good performance in the All Peaks competition, the situation was changing. Zen had showed some excellent talents so far, and he definitely would not stay in the eastern region forever. It was natural that he would seek for better opportunities out of the area and travel around, which would let him show off his strength in a bigger world. The eastern region was too small. At this moment, Zen was easily qualified, or even exceeded the qualifications required to marry the princess of the Burning Sky Empire. With a similar thought tossing and turning in her mind, Nina was having mixed reactions to Zen's outstanding performance. On one hand, she felt happy for Zen. And on the other, she felt a loss in her heart. The first time she had seen Zen, she had carefully maintained her sense of superiority and pride before Zen, staying at a minimum distance. But this young man had grown rapidly. Such a fast growth rate had made her breathless and at the same time, made her feel that the distance between them was getting broader and broader. Deeply indulged in these complex feelings and thoughts, there was a little lapse in her concentration right in the middle of the competition and she lost track. When she regained her consciousness, she suddenly found that a beautiful girl was standing beside Zen. She felt even more depressed now. Who was that girl? How could she suddenly appear and why is she standing by Zen? Nina had many questions to ask, but it was obvious that none of the people around her could answer those. She was not the only one to have such inquiries. Actually, almost no one could understand what was going on and wanted to ask, who on earth is that girl? How could she appear like a ghost out of nowhere without any sound and sign? Even some saints who were present could not understand what had happened. Sword spirit. A sword spirit with a body. Elder Shu, don't tell me that Zen has just obtained this sword spirit. And don't say that this sword spirit is a newly formed one. Kenneth murmured, with his eyes fixed upon the girl in the arena. Hearing the remarks from Kenneth, Elder Shu felt speechless and depressed. He didn't know what to say and therefore, did not respond directly. However, he also complained in his heart, what else can I tell you? Can't you see everything clearly by yourself? You also know that a swordsman needs to comprehend the sword intent completely before he can condense his sword spirit. And it normally takes years of time for the sword spirit to be condensed into a human shape. And only remarkably amazing swordsmen with extreme talents can do that after years of training. Some swordsmen in the past could not condense their sword spirits even though they have completely mastered the sword intent. Apart from Elder Shu's arguments, one's destiny also played a big role. But Zen's destiny was obviously too good. Even Elder Shu felt jealous in his heart. Normally, with his powerful strength and temperament as a high-level refiner, he could have dealt with any unexpected case in front of him calmly. Someone had even joked that he would not have blinked his eyes even when the mountains fell down. But this time, Elder Shu could not maintain his calmness. Such a supreme talent and luck had made nearly everyone feel jealous. Even someone as calm as Patrick also felt surprised to see Zen's progress. His eyes sparkled, and when he saw the sword spirit, he sprang out of his meditation. Normally, the essential condition of cultivating Buddhist method was to stay calm and hold an even temper. Patrick had a very fine temper and could be considered an outstanding Buddhist refiner. However, he could not keep his usual calm nature at this moment. His story just now was like a monk who had chanted sutras all day long and lived a regular life. He would wake up in the morning with the sound of the bell in his temple and end his day after hearing the pounding of the drums. He would care the least about the wealth, relationship and love in the world. Buddhism was his whole life. He was sincere in his prayers and hoped that one day he could inherit Buddhism. But one day, his quiet life was broken. A small monk had come to the temple, and it had not taken him long time to come across Buddha and receive the inheritance from Buddha. So, on encountering this kind of thing, Patrick could only laugh bitterly and at the same time, secretly scolded in his heart, "Idiot. This is unfair." Besides, Tracy was also pestering Patrick, continuously barraging him with questions. "Patrick, what on earth is that? I feel that she is not a real human. How could this woman appear so suddenly?" Owing to her divine legendary beast blood, Tracy's instinct was sensing that Lily wasn't human and might be special. She could identify that Lily was not a real human, but she could not know what Lily actually was. "That is a sword spirit." Patrick was getting a little impatient by her non-stop inquiries and told her directly. "Oh, really?" Sensing his impatient mood, Tracy pouted her lips. She did not know why Patrick was unhappy. How could he be unhappy? The sword spirit was not a special thing that they had never heard of before. How could it make Patrick's temper short? Back inside the fighting field, Rocher had just condensed his own extreme thunder sword intent and had been very proud of that. But when he saw the appearance of Zen's sword spirit, he could not help it and a shiver ran across his whole body. People who did not know exactly what had happened to him would have thought that he had received an electric shock by his own thunder. Then he just forced a weak smile on his face. That was a very, very bitter smile. He shook his head and remarked weakly, "I thought it was very lucky for me to meditate and form the thunder intent in the sword-washing pool, which let me combine it to my sword intent. After all, the famous sword-washing pool is an area where no one from the eastern region has ever been lucky enough to be allowed to enter for thousands of years. I was really happy and proud to come across this lucky chance. But I have never thought that you were able to condense your sword spirit and even form a human shape out of it." Rocher took a deep breath to calm himself down after this long speech. His words cast a light to most of the disciples. Only after his explanation did they actually understand what had happened inside the arena. Sword spirit. That woman beside Zen is his sword spirit. Is that true? I cannot believe my ears. But that is totally, utterly, impossible. I remember reading in a book of sword refinement. There were some records about the sword spirit in there. It said that after reaching the consummate sword intent, the sword refiner could form his sword spirit. But it can take at least 3 to 5 years if everything goes smoothly. And moreover, it can often take up to dozens of years to form it into human shape. Some sword refiners never get to form their sword spirit even after they have got the consummate sword intent. Are you kidding? Is your book about some false refining method? Zen just meditated the consummate sword intent for a couple of hours, and now, you can see that he has a sword spirit by his side. I don't know yet. That is the record in the book. I suppose, the record would not be wrong. I think what happened is that Zen has refreshed the record in the book. He might even have broken it and set a new one. No wonder that they were all so confused. Zen had directly transformed his sword spirit into a human-shaped one, which had shocked even the Cyan Dragon in his mind. The Cyan Dragon had lived for a long time. So long that no one knew exactly how old the Cyan Dragon was. In his eons of lifespan, the dragon had witnessed so many outstanding refiners or special events but had never seen someone condensing his spirit so fast into human shape. If even the dragon was stunned, it would clearly be even harder for the people of the eastern region to accept the fact that Zen had condensed the sword spirit and then formed a human shape from it in only a few hours. So, Zen had really broken the record in the book. Zen, the place where I practice the consummate sword intent is Sword-Washing Pool, which is a semi-sacred region. Would you mind telling me where you have been? What did you experience there? Rocher asked out his doubts and then added hastily, "It would be fine if you think that is confidential." Zen shook his head. In his mind, there was nothing confidential regarding the place where he had got the consummate sword intent. He answered directly, "A mountain. It is called the Killing Sword Mountain." Killing Sword Mountain. Rocher's eyes narrowed into slits in shock. The sword washing pool could only be considered as a semi-sacred site. There were a lot of sacred sites much above the sword washing pool. As far as Rocher could remember, the Killing Sword Mountain, the Tidal Sword Tomb and the Heavenly Sword Tablet were the top 3 sacred sites for practicing sword skills. If he could choose, he would have most likely selected the Heavenly Sword Tablet, which was the best fit for his heavenly sword cultivation method. He would have been able to gain more if he had practiced his sword intent there. However, he did not have a choice. It all depended on his fate. It was always sacred sites which chose a person, and not the other way around. He, Rocher, was not qualified at all. You are too strong, Zen. I thought that I might not be as strong as Patrick before, but I always believed that I could catch up with him one day. But you, Zen, you are the first person whom I don't have the confidence that I can catch up with. Rocher murmured, with a sad look in his face. However, he kept speaking, there are too many talents in this world. The number is too big for me to imagine. Maybe I can be considered a genius in the eastern region but nothing in the central region. But I want to catch up with you. Even if I cannot keep pace with you, my efforts will help me achieve more progress. If he could not catch up with a genius, then he would probably follow the genius steps closely. It was not hard to figure out that Rocher had a good temperament. At least, he was not driven mad by jealousy and had not generated a private demon in his heart, which would have definitely blocked his road of refinement. Therefore, even though I know it is hard for me to win, I still want to continue our fight. I will insist on my sword refinement and will never give up. After saying that, he raised his blood-corroding sword. He summoned his life vitality to drive the thunder and lightning flow around his sword and displayed the consummate sword intent. In this way, he stabbed at Zen. Chapter 292, Number 1 Peak. There were many reasons why Zen admired Rocher. One of them was his humility. Since Rocher was born from nothing, it wasn't always easy for him to stay grounded after he achieved great success in practicing. Some disciples who were also born from nothing became extremely proud after having made some achievements. They regarded themselves as the pride of heaven. They thought that they were so virtuous and talented as if nobody on earth could beat them. Thus, they gradually slacked off in practicing. Even if they were talented disciples, their arrogance slowly diminished their will of martial arts, and they became just mediocre disciples with time. However, Rocher wasn't conceited or rash. He still had a good attitude and state of mind even though Zen's performance had made him feel hopeless and desperate. He didn't feel discouraged at all. He even told Zen that he would try his best to follow in his footsteps even though he couldn't surpass him. Maybe other people were more gifted than Rocher, but only a few of them were as benevolent as him. Now, although Rocher had spoken modestly, his move with the sword wasn't modest at all. Zen wouldn't dare underestimate this move. The heavenly sword of Rocher could originally use the extremely terrifying power of heavens. After he had comprehended the consummate sword intent, his sword intent became even fuller and fiercer. More importantly, he had comprehended the power of thunder in the sword washing pool. Now, he had both the powers of thunder and the heavens. When the two of them were combined, the power of the sword would be equal to the punishment of heaven. Meanwhile, Zen's face stiffened in horror as he looked at the sword with the punishment from heaven. The sword spirit, Lily, instantly spilt into small fragments of sword intent under Zen's control and attached herself to the streamer's sword in Zen's hand. In reality, Zen wasn't that skilled in controlling the sword spirit. If he could use the sword spirit well, he didn't need to attach Lily to the streamer's sword after he called her out. He could attach her directly to the streamer's sword through his body. However, it was just a skill. Zen would control it in time as he became better in using the sword spirit. Lily's malicious aura was quite strong, and it was unknown how many creatures she had killed to have such a powerful malicious aura. When she stood next to Zen, she was able to contain all of the malicious aura in her body. However, the strong and fierce malicious aura suddenly burst out when she was attached to the streamer's sword. A butcher who slaughtered cows and pigs every day would have an increasing amount of malicious aura in his body as time passed. This kind of aura was relatively weak, and only sensitive people could feel it. Others wouldn't say he looked murderous, but most people couldn't feel this kind of weak malicious aura anyway. Dogs were always the most sensitive to the malicious aura. It was why they always barked at butchers when they saw them on the street. The malicious aura that emanated from the butchers made the sensitive dogs quite afraid. Thus, it followed that malicious aura posed a threat to creatures. It had a stronger negative vibes compared to other kinds of strengths and auras. For example, just a look from the war veterans who had fought for a long time would make some people feel absolutely terrified. That was the kind of effect that the malicious aura had. At present, the malicious aura in Zen's body wasn't that strong. Although he had entered the killing sword mountain due to fate and passively chose the killing way to cultivate his sword skills, the malicious aura couldn't be gathered in just one night. He had just started practicing the killing sword skill and his malicious aura was still weak, but it didn't affect his usage of Lily's malicious aura. As soon as Lily was attached to the streamer sword, the turbulent malicious aura instantly burst out. The crowd felt that it was a demon, and not a human who stood in front of them, under the influence of the malicious aura. And, the devil was so cruel that he would cut off their heads at any time and in any place. Some timid disciples even felt their legs tremble at the presence of the strong malicious aura. Their knees buckled and they crumpled down to the ground. Oh my, Zen became a devil. Some disciples began to shout hysterically under the malicious aura's influence. What a horrible killing aura. What exactly has he gone through? He didn't have the malicious aura before, but why did he suddenly have a strong malicious aura now? Some of them exclaimed. However, they were still clearly awed by the sight. After a while, the two powerful auras instantly collided with each other. Rocher's sword symbolized the power of heaven. He looked like he was an angel from heaven at that moment, sent to punish the criminals of the world for their sins. On the other hand, Zen was like a devil raised against the heavens. His killing sword skill seemed like it could slaughter every creature in the world. To be the god of heaven through killing. To resist the strength of heaven through killing. Bang! A loud, booming noise came from the two powerful swords when they collided with each other. The thunder and lightning, which looked like a punishment from heaven, hit Zen with sword intent after sword intent. In turn, the malicious aura in Zen's streamer's sword turned into spools of long threads and charged at the thunder and lightning as well. Some of the long threads shattered into pieces when they crashed against the thunder and lightning. However, the long threads seemed to flow endlessly. After the thunder and lightning broke a series of the threads, another wave of threads burst out and rushed towards Rocher. After a while, the abrasion from the countless long threads had weakened the power of Rocher's sword. The malicious aura finally disintegrated the surging thunder and lightning not long after. The killing sword skill was a highly strong and powerful skill of swordsmanship. Zen didn't get to practice the cultivation method of the malicious aura, so he couldn't fully use the power of the killing sword skill, but he still defeated the sword of Rocher. Had he practiced the cultivation method that matched the malicious aura, its power would have been 10 times stronger than it had been just now. Although the killing sword skill was strong and powerful, it had a disadvantage. If the practitioner's body had too much malicious aura in it, demons would consume him and in the end, he might be destroyed by the malicious aura. Fortunately, Zen wouldn't have such trouble since he had a resonance between his soul consciousness and the killing sword mountain. After his move with the sword was defeated by Zen, Rocher took back the blood-corroding sword and returned it to its sheath. However, the winner was still in doubt when Rocher took back his sword. Then again, Rocher still chose to take the sword back and end the competition. It wasn't because he didn't want to fight anymore, but rather, he knew that Zen would also try his best if he gave his all in the fight, but he would still lose in the end. He would do his best to fight back if his opponent was roughly as strong as him, because he might have a chance to win. However, Rocher had already lost to Zen when they comprehended the consummate sword intent. Moreover, his strength was far behind Zen's now. Thus, it was useless to fight with Zen anymore since he would definitely lose to him in the end anyway. I lost, Rocher declared. The referee who stood next to them heard Rocher and proclaimed the winner. Zen, the disciple of the Drizzle Peak won. And Rocher, the disciple of the Skytop Peak lost. He announced. Number 1. We are number 1, someone shouted. Several masters of Drizzle Peak happily clapped their hands and celebrated Zen's victory with each other. Meanwhile, Master Wen's eyes slightly moistened. Zen defeated Rocher in this competition and finally became the first out of all the disciples in 33 peaks. Since Zen was ranked first among all the disciples in all the peaks, then Drizzle Peak became the first out of all the 33 peaks because of him. The Drizzle Peak, which used to rank the last among all the peaks, suddenly became first. It was a miracle and it was all because of Zen. The masters and all the disciples of Drizzle Peak couldn't believe the news. They thought it was unreal, as if they were in a sweet dream. If so, they hoped that they would never wake up from the dream. The next and last opponent Zen had to fight was Patrick. So far, no one had pushed Patrick to do his best in the competitions. He was the top disciple in Cloud Sect, only next to the extraordinarily talented Evan. It wasn't easy to gauge his real strength. Zen clearly knew that it would be tough to win against Patrick in their upcoming competition. Before he had comprehended the consummate sword intent, he wasn't that positive about his fight against Patrick. But now he had comprehended it, and the sword spirit lily boosted his confidence in the competition. However, it was still hard for Zen to determine what his chances were. After all, he didn't know Patrick's real strength, and he didn't have a reference to measure it. He just hoped that there would be someone powerful to fight against Patrick first. Unfortunately, only a few disciples had the ability to challenge Patrick. Wing was a man of great power, but Patrick defeated him in a second. Jacques was powerful too, but Zen had already swallowed up his flood dragon bone spear, so he couldn't do his best to fight Patrick anymore. As for Tracy, Zen thought that she wouldn't go all out to fight Patrick and surrender instead, although she tried her best and activated the body of the Blue Phoenix when she fought against him. However, to Zen's surprise, Tracy was picked in the draw lots to compete against Patrick on the battlefield. Just as Zen had guessed, Tracy cheerfully surrendered as soon as they got on the battlefield. The girl is only cruel when she fights against me, Zen thought and shook his head. Fortunately, the Lord expressed his wish to look after Zen. Thus, the referee drew lots again after Tracy surrendered, and Patrick's name was drawn once more. This time, he was slated to compete against Rocher. A smile formed on Zen's lips. Not everyone could force Patrick to do his best in the competition, but Rocher was the best man for the job. However, Zen wondered how long Rocher would last, or if he could directly defeat Patrick. Chapter 293, Akalanatha. Either way, both possibilities worked in Zen's favor. Now, on the Cloud Sect list, the only opponent left for Zen was Patrick. Although Evan ranked first in the previous competition, he was still held up in a secluded place for cultivation. Usually, such cultivation period could either be long or short. With the level Evan reached, he would be staying in that place for 3 months at least or 1 year at most. Therefore, his chances of making an appearance at this All Peaks competition were slim. That was how Patrick ended up as the last disciple to compete Zen. If he was defeated, then Zen would rank first among the Cloud Sect disciples. The match between Rocher and Patrick had generated a lot of interest. While Zen previously defeated Rocher, it didn't mean he was a weak fighter or competitor, because it was really not easy to gain advantage in the competition with Zen, who was dubbed a monster for the manner he had beaten his opponents. As far as the other disciples were concerned, it was unbelievable that a human at the second grade of the nature level could be so powerful, and the only way they could explain this was to say Zen was a monster. For them, it made sense that a monster had some kind of superpower that a human did not possess. Both Rocher and Patrick had demonstrated great competence at the start, so the battle between them would be very fierce. When the referee called their names, Patrick and Rocher walked to the battle ring. Still keeping a low profile, Patrick said lightly, "Rocher, I've been waiting for this competition for a long time." "Me too," Rocher nodded. The two had been observing each other for a long time, so there was no need to say more. After comprehending the consummate sword intent, Rocher had gone to the sword washing pool to practice cultivation, and his ability increased considerably. However, competing with Zen humbled him slightly, and he had realized that no matter how powerful he was, there would always be someone more powerful than him. On the other hand, Patrick appeared very modest until now, had not demonstrated his real competence yet. He was like a volcano in the heavy twilight. Nobody knew what kind of power this volcano would unleash once it erupted. It was Rocher who thrust his sword first. Using the sword steps, he immediately advanced towards Patrick. In the beginning, they didn't use much strength and seemed to be thinking of suppressing each other with their skills. Obviously, Rocher had the advantage in this aspect because he had both sword and sword steps. However, when Rocher was close enough to Patrick and was about to attack, he realized how wrong he was about his opponent. Still without a weapon, and not even using the samsara of Buddhism for this competition, Patrick was already powerful enough and could put up a good fight. With the protection of golden lights flashing above his hands, he simply patted Rocher's sword with his bare hands. Bang, bang, bang. 12 times Rocher thrust his sword, but Patrick's fighting speed never slowed down as he parried each thrust. Like scattered leaves in the wind, his big strong hands floated in the air and slapped at Rocher's blade. Everyone was shocked when they saw Patrick block Rocher's sword attack with bare hands. His form looked so powerful. Even Zen, who had dazzled other disciples with his sturdy build, couldn't parry Rocher's sword with bare hands alone. However, some disciples with eagle eyes learned this was not the case at all. The palm method Patrick was using right now, called the Grand Leaf Palm method, was perfect both in strength and speed control. It looked as if he was patting the edge of Rocher's sword directly, although, in actuality, he was only tapping the blade from the side and pushing it away. To deflect the quick attack of Patrick's Grand Leaf Palm method, Rocher kept on changing his sword steps. However, whether near or far from Patrick, Rocher couldn't break through his defense. As the pace of attacks picked up, Patrick began to use more skills that he had never shown in front of the other disciples. Grand Leaf Palm, Shadow Finger, Prajna Palm, Patra Leaf Finger, Wisdom Nosmos Finger. Rocher was dazzled by these magic cultivation methods of the Buddhist, and the other disciples were stunned too. Everyone had so many questions in their minds, and things to say. How could Patrick have learned so many cultivation methods of the Buddhist? He must have robbed the sutra depository of some temple. Don't be silly, there is no temple in the eastern region. All the famous temples in the central region have a longer history than our Cloud Hall, so he couldn't have robbed any of these. Since Buddhist cultivation methods were quite mysterious and not widely spread, these methods Patrick was demonstrating in his fight with Rocher seemed more valuable, and nobody could tell where he had learned all these methods. The situation in the battle ring was gradually controlled by Patrick, who relied on his dazzling palm and finger cultivation methods for a counterattack. Rocher failed to take advantage in the battle with his blood-corroding sword and even had to withdraw on several occasions when under attack by Patrick. Realizing that he couldn't compete with Patrick in skills, Rocher stepped back and raised his sword to accumulate strength. As momentum converged in his body, Rocher started to summon the heavenly sword. Sensing the energy emanated from Rocher's body, Patrick turned sober. Although Zen had broken through the attack of Rocher's heavenly sword, it didn't mean his opponent was too weak to fight. Rather, Rocher had failed because Zen was just too strong. Samsara of Buddhism. As soon as Patrick shouted, 6 golden beads appeared on his side. The beads were called 6-realm beads because they contained the strength of 6 realms. When Patrick summoned the 6-realm beads, they began spinning slowly. Patrick had defeated Wing with these beads in the previous competition. In that match, he had absorbed Wing's attacking strength by directing it to the beads, then used that strength on Wing, leading to his defeat. So this time Patrick summoned these beads again. Rocher became more cautious. Heavenly Punishment Sword, Rocher shouted. He knew how powerful the 6-realm beads were, so he needed to use his most powerful skill. Many of the disciples nodded in agreement with his wise decision. Had they been in Rocher's place, they would have taken the same action. Because if Rocher didn't go all out, his strength would be absorbed by Patrick and he would end up being passive in the competition. The power of the 6-realm beads might be horrible, but they did have their limit. If Rocher could get past that limit, he would be able to break the samsara of the Buddhism. With the overwhelming pressure from Rocher's heavenly punishment sword, a stream of full sword intent as thick as a bucket rushed towards Patrick. After several buzzes, the 6-realm beads started spinning at an extremely high speed. The beads were spinning so fast that they looked to be forming a golden circle in the process. In the blink of an eye, Rocher's sword that completed the Extreme Thunder Sword intent got pulled into the circle. Block. As Patrick's eyes glinted, the force field in the golden circle began changing radically. The sword Rocher had thrust had reduced in speed, and now looked like it was about to be blocked in the golden circle. If Rocher's sword ended up blocked, Patrick could easily reverse the 6-realm beads and strengthen the attacking strength from Rocher before bouncing it back. That would undoubtedly lead to Rocher's failure. Of course, Rocher was not about to let that happen. Since he would give his all, there was the possibility of burning and releasing all his life vitality. Are you trying to block my sword? No way, he thought. Because of Rocher's momentum, the Extreme Thunder Sword intent in his weapon went berserk. Every bolt of lightning it released was now as thick as an arm and looked like trapped beasts attempting to break out of the cage. A series of snaps were overheard, until cracks finally appeared on Patrick's golden circle. There was no doubt it could no longer withstand the tearing of the Extreme Thunder Sword intent. Discussion among the crowd grew. Look at that, Rocher's sword is indeed more powerful. Since ancient times, defense has always been more difficult than attack. Patrick may be powerful, however, compared to a mere defense, attacking is still the best defense. If the golden circle breaks, defeat is certain for Patrick. As minutes passed, it seemed like the golden circle was on the verge of collapse because more cracks were showing, and it even began shaking. Taking advantage of the favorable situation, Rocher roared, "Break!" This was instantly followed by a loud ripping sound. The extreme thunder sword intent used by Rocher finally ripped the golden circle. But the battle was not over yet. Patrick, who was now frowning, was suddenly bathed in golden light. He stretched his arms, and a shadow appeared behind him. There was a slight gasp from the crowd as a Buddha emerged. Unlike other Buddhas that were always smiling, this one looked like he was in a rage. Buddhas generally had two expressions. He looked peaceful as he smiled while in meditation. On the other hand, when he wanted to teach wicked people a lesson or alert the masses to get rid of their sins, his face took on an aggressive look. It's Akalanatha. How could Patrick summon Akalanatha? Is he a descendant of Akalanatha? The questions were fired by one disciple, while others around him stared at him, thinking he was an idiot. The Buddha was far different from the legendary beast. Moreover, monks in temples were not allowed to be intimate with women, so it was impossible for them to sire an heir. So how could a Buddha have any descendants? Realizing he had said something wrong, the disciple's face flushed pink. Maybe Patrick is the reincarnation of Akalanatha, he suggested. Yes, that's probably it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to learn so many of the Buddhist cultivation methods. Another disciple shouted in agreement. No wonder he's so powerful. He's the reincarnation of Akalanatha. Rocher is not likely to fight the shadow of Akalanatha. At this point, Patrick appeared calm. On the other hand, the shadow of Akalanatha behind him looked horrible with its angry expression. Akalanatha palm. As Patrick cried out, he clasped his hands then pointed at the extreme thunder sword intent lightly. Then a palm appeared in the air before it swept towards the extreme thunder sword intent. Chapter 294, 2 million cubic crystals. Akalanatha's virtual shadow pushed Patrick's palm, and the result was equal to Trasis' grip as she aimed at Zen. But obviously, Patrick's strength was more powerful. His strength wasn't due to bloodline heritage but from Akalanatha's reincarnation. On the golden palm were rows of Sanskrit flowing and spreading golden light continuously. Feeling the power of the golden palm changed Rocher's expression. He finally escaped from Patrick's samsara of Buddhism, but that meant suffering from the horrible pain. He wondered, is this Patrick's real strength? Staring at the huge palm while gritting his teeth, Rocher borrowed more vitality from heaven and earth, and additionally, some of heaven's power. The sharper extreme thunder sword intent, from the bottom all the way up, tried to resist the palm. This move would decide the victor and loser. Rocher thought, if I win, it will be my pleasure, if I lose, it will be my destiny. Bang! The loud sound was a result of the golden palm meeting the blue thunder light, and this dazzling glow made it difficult for people to open their eyes because it felt like a star exploding in the competition field. However, Zen, who was outside the competition field, was not one of them. The light spots reflected on his brown pupils as he watched every movement of the two people fighting. Shaking his head, Zen predicted, Rocher will be defeated. Earlier, Rocher said his chance of winning over Patrick was 50% now, and this would increase to 90% once he entered the illuminating soul realm. Rocher had clearly underestimated his opponent. With his current strength, Rocher didn't even have a 10% chance of winning against Patrick. To be fair, Rocher had a fantastic breakthrough. He had comprehended the consummate sword intent and washed his blade in the sword-washing pool, the semi-sacred place. And this strength should be enough to cover the shortage of his lower level. In other words, Rocher thought that if he stepped into the illuminating soul realm, he had a 90% chance of beating Patrick. But he was quite naive to think that. Akalanatha's reincarnation of Patrick was too powerful. And this was quite disturbing. If Rocher had a next better chance and broke into the illuminating soul realm, he would probably have the strength to compete with Patrick. The radiance on the competition field had disappeared. Rocher supported his shaky body with the blood-corroding sword. His lean, controlled face now had a sad look. A youth confident of becoming more powerful with every battle suffered defeat repeatedly. He now seemed frustrated. But frustration had a different effect for every individual. There are extremely arrogant people whose dedication to martial arts is limited. So, once defeated, this kind of person easily breaks. Eventually, he would stop training and even suffer from mental problems, making it difficult to make a comeback for the rest of his life. On the other hand, there are arrogant people with a stronger commitment to martial arts. Thus any setback only serves to develop their courage, and they practice harder for the future. These people seek more opportunities to win and ultimately have the last laugh. I was defeated. With this declaration, Rocher put the blood-corroding sword on his back, and the sorrow earlier seen in his face immediately disappeared. Apparently, he was the latter. You are the first one with the strength of nature-level consummation to force me to release the honored Akalanatha. You don't need to have the metal load. With your developing gift, if you're in the same realm as me, I probably won't defeat you, Patrick stated casually. As he said this, the virtual shadow of Akalanatha behind him gradually scattered. Saluting, Rocher replied, I have just lost. I can't deny the truth. I will not find an excuse on our different levels. But I hope we will have another chance to learn from one another here in the future. Acknowledging the salute, Patrick nodded. He had to respect such an opponent. After coming down from the competition field, Patrick focused his eyes on Zen and said calmly, Zen, there's only one round left in the All Peaks competition. And that's the match between you and me. The young disciple nodded and wondered what made Patrick say that. I need several days to summon my Akalanatha again after I use it once. Would you like to fight today or in 3 days? Patrick was hoping the answer would be in his favor. The Akalanatha was powerful, but with Patrick's present strength, he had no energy to release it continuously. Once this was summoned, it would take several days to recover before it could be put to use again. What Patrick wanted was for Zen to choose what day they would compete. If they fought now, Patrick couldn't use all his strength. At the end of the All Peaks competition, both Zen and Patrick would lose interest in their ranking. The champion of the All Peaks competition could receive a turbidity clearing pill and a fairy weapon. Besides, the top 3 earned the right to walk on Cloud Road. Even if Zen was defeated, Kenneth could probably reward Zen with the turbidity clearing pill and fairy weapon. His decision would depend on the strength and the talent Zen had displayed. If I can't compete with your peak strength, my warrior spirit won't be pleased, Zen smiled. Fighting did not faze Zen. If Patrick's strength was not at its peak, even if he defeated Patrick, the battle Zen had looked forward to for a long time wouldn't be perfect. There would be no satisfaction with that kind of victory, so Zen didn't have a reason to choose to fight now. So, it was best to wait. Okay, in 3 days. I will wait for you. Patrick nodded in acknowledgement. That meant the All Peaks competition, which had lasted for a few days, would be paused. In fact, the results had already come out, but only the number 1 and number 2 positions were held in suspense to see who between Zen and Patrick would occupy the slots. The number 3 spot belonged to Rocher, Tracy came in at number 4, and Jacques was no. 5. This was how the Cloud Sect list looked at present. Of the 33 peaks, Drizzle Peak was suddenly on top, with Skytop Peak dropping to 2nd place. The other 31 peaks had new rankings. All the disciples outside the competition field started to leave. Zen went up to the platform, directly to where Kenneth was seated. In the past, someone would hoot at Zen before he even came close to the platform, demanding him not to go any nearer. But now, the saints and elders remained silent. It was now quite clear that Zen was a person that Kenneth paid great attention to. Moreover, this little guy's future attainment would be hard to evaluate. Yet, it would still be easy for him to surpass those saints. Sir, Zen greeted Kenneth with a salute as he stepped on the platform. What is it that you want? Kenneth asked, but with his insights, how could he not figure out what Zen was thinking? The talented disciple came to him now because of Yan. I want to see my younger sister, Zen replied. You mean Yan? Kenneth inquired. He was curious to know more. Zen nodded and said, I hope you can release her. 1,000 years, 1 million points, equal to 2 million cubic crystals. I can pay for that. His offer came as a surprise for Kenneth. As it was previously announced, Yan would be locked in Hell Mountain for 1,000 years. But there was a rule in Cloud Sect that if someone paid 1,000 points, her sentence would be reduced by 1 year. Therefore, it would take 1 million points, equivalent to 2 million cubic crystals, to save Yan. But 2 million cubic crystals was no joke. And Kenneth was very curious how Zen could accumulate so many cubic crystals. It was not easy to take out 2 million cubic crystals even for any of the top 7 noble clans. After all, these families possessed fixed assets, and how could they have so much cash? Yet here was Zen, a warrior from a poor family. Knowing the fortune of the Luo family, getting even several cubic crystals would be difficult, let alone several million. Finally, he had to ask. Where did you get so much money? It was out of curiosity that he was asking. It doesn't matter where I got that much money. The point is, can these cubic crystals be used in exchange for my sister's freedom? If it can, I certainly have so many cubic crystals to pay you, Zen explained. With his current method, it would be so easy to make money. 50 drops of heavenly essence could be sold for 250,000 cubic crystals at an auction. He refined only 100 mysterious weapons and got hundreds of drops of heavenly essence. Even if a large quantity of heavenly essence was on the market, and the price would go down, it was still not difficult to collect 2 million cubic crystals. Furthermore, Zen could seek Wirt's assistance. It was believed that given Zen's current performance, he could get enough favors from the Zhang clan. It would not be a problem to borrow 2 million cubic crystals from the clan. After all, they were the wealthiest family in the eastern region, and even the top 7 noble clans were poor compared to the Zhang clan. Though Kenneth seldom showed up at Cloud Sect, he was very clear about the eastern region territory. If Zen was confident to take out 2 million cubic crystals, Kenneth could easily guess that it had something to do with the Zhang clan. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the disciple to accumulate such a large fortune. With Zen's current talent and strength, he had a very promising future and would be worth the investment of the Zhang clan, Kenneth thought. Finally, Kenneth sighed, alas. No, the young disciple was a jumble of nerves, but outwardly, he looked calm. Since entering Cloud Sect, Zen was clear about his purpose, to save his sister and get her away from Hell Mountain at the soonest possible time. If it was possible, Zen didn't want Yan to stay at that mountain 1 minute longer. That was why he always strove for the 1 million points. Even if he had to spend some points in practicing cultivation methods, he only invested in himself when he had the confidence to earn more points. However, no, even if you pay 2 million cubic crystals, which are 1 million points, you can't take her away, Kenneth said while shaking his head. Why? Zen implored. As he gritted his teeth, his heart raced faster and his eyes were slowly turning red. Chapter 295, Hidden Facts. How could Zen not be angry? There were 2 important parts of his life. Martial arts was the path on which he wished to harvest his achievements, and Yan was his most cherished, beloved little sister. To make it to where he was, Zen had sacrificed a great deal only to suddenly be told that all he had done was in vain. The dream that once seemed so close to him slipped right through his fingers just before he could reach it. How on earth could he possibly take it easy? Meeting Zen's eyes, Kenneth was neither fazed nor afraid. With a plain smile, he simply said, "You don't have to be so angry. Yan was imprisoned in Hell Mountain for a reason. And as her brother, you deserve to know why." "Out with it, then," said Zen with a dark scowl at Kenneth, darting a fierce glare of hate. Even though Kenneth was way stronger and more powerful than him, who was able to kill him in a single strike, at that moment, Zen didn't care one bit. Hatred and determination drove him, bolstering him to man up, showing no sign of cowardice. Yan is supposed to be the disciple in Cloud Sect with the greatest potential. As you know, not many female disciples enroll in Cloud Sect, leading to Lady Peak's depopulation. Among those girls, only a few are truly good. You see, Jill is one of the most talented there, and yet, she didn't get a very good result in the competition, said Kenneth slowly. Pausing for a moment, he caught Zen's attention. But Yan is different. Unlike those lesser girls, Yan possesses true talent. I have high expectations for her. I can see even greater potential in her than in you, Zen. Do you know what our purpose is? Do you know why we bother to establish a Cloud Sect here in the Eastern region? We, Cloud Hall, aim to attract all the talents of the Eastern region. Once their true potential is identified, they would be sent to Cloud Hall for further learning. The world of warriors is a world where only the fittest survive. To make it here, one has to endure fierce competition and strong opponents. And as numerous geniuses as there may be, there is a hunger here for true super geniuses, who will be cherished and nurtured by all sects. According to my judgment, you are very gifted in martial arts, Zen. Normally, from higher to lower, we divide the potential for martial arts into 3 grades, heaven, earth, and human. However, an even greater grade than heaven is saint. You've got tremendous potential, Zen, so much that your grade is somewhere between heaven and saint. Your talent may be remarkable, but still, no match for your sister's. She's a saint-level talent. How can we afford to send a saint-level talent to Perdition Mountain? Yes, she hurt the young clan's eldest son and disabled him. But that was nothing compared to her future achievements. Even if she slaughtered the whole young clan, I, Kenneth, would still back her up. As Kenneth went on, he stood from his chair, overcome by his determination. His strong hands were clenched tightly behind his back to the point of his knuckles widening. The expression on his face seemed more emotional than usual. At that moment, Kenneth's passion was so compelling that when faced with him, one would barely be able to breathe easily. Were Zen an average disciple, he might have yielded to Kenneth's strength and knelt down. But because Zen was just as resolute, he managed to stay calm and composed in front of Kenneth's overwhelming demeanor. Beside them, seeing Zen handling himself easily, standing up straight, Elder Shu felt a sense of relief and remained where he was. Though he was ready to help Zen resist, lest he be hurt by Kenneth's strength, to his surprise, Zen looked neutral, as if he was barely affected by the former's power. However, although Zen kept a calm facade, deep inside, he was rather shocked by Kenneth's words as he brooded over what he was just told. In the beginning, he thought Yan was confined to Perdition Mountain because of her severe offense to the Yun clan, and everything that followed was the clan's retaliation. It seemed, now, that his guess was wrong. According to Kenneth, Yan was the most promising disciple of the Cloud sect, and he would do anything or go against anyone to protect her. Though he might have been exaggerating to help emphasize his point, his words revealed a certain truth. In Kenneth's eyes, Yan was more important than the entire Yun clan. So why was she imprisoned in Hell Mountain, then? What did Kenneth say was the reason behind it? Seeing that Zen was lost in thought, Kenneth paused for another moment. With a sigh, he looked up at the boundless sky and said, "You Luo family have been mediocre for generations. But suddenly, a pair of geniuses were born. I would say that your births were God's design. God's will works in mysterious ways, after all, as is how we all ended up here. Whatever happens to you has been predetermined before your birth. It's fate that Yan was sent to Perdition Mountain, and fate doomed you to be unable to do anything about it. But one's fate can be changed. By working hard enough, one day, you will take a step beyond the illuminating soul realm, and even refine yourself in the internal elixir realm. With all that, you might be able to free your sister from confinement. I believe that one day you will. But not now. Right now, you're too weak. You haven't yet reached your full potential. You're too weak to achieve your dreams and too weak to save your beloved ones. You may have amazing talent, but the world is vast and full of people with talent. There are many talented people but very few truly accomplished ones. Not many talents can survive the hardships and come out strong." Kenneth's shots of, "too weak," at him made Zen's heart sink. He couldn't help but be apprehensive. Yan seemed to be in greater trouble than he thought, and Kenneth didn't have a say in her release either. Moreover, Kenneth's requirements sounded completely impossible. Enter the illuminating soul realm, and then step beyond it. Become one of the internal elixir realm warriors. Such stages were out of Zen's reach. But he knew that Kenneth wasn't trying to humiliate him. Kenneth was trying to tell him how powerful the opponents were and how radical the challenges he would face if he were to set his sister free. Compared to internal elixir warriors, Zen's strength was like that of an ant. If they met in battle, he would be blown away like a grain of dust as he turned into literal ashes. "Sir, I don't quite understand yet. If my sister is so important to Cloud Hall, why was she sent to Perdition Mountain? Was it because of her great potential?" asked Zen. Kenneth nodded, but after a moment, also shook his head. With another defeated sigh, he continued, "Not just that. Apart from her aptitude in martial arts, she was gifted with a special peculiarity. Her body is suitable for energy storing. She has what is called the purple power body." "Purple power body?" asked Zen with an arched brow. He had never heard of such a thing. "You heard me right. It's a special natural talent passed on by blood, inherited only by women. And when a woman of purple power body enters the internal elixir realm, her internal elixir is called the purple power elixir, very different from the usual ones, and more powerful than that of common people. A woman with purple power in the internal elixir stage is someone far beyond her peers of both genders," explained Kenneth. "I see my sister is a remarkable woman, it seems. Do you mean someone is coveting her natural talent? Can this purple power body be taken by force?" asked Zen. Now, he felt that he was finally close to the truth. Such a special talent is extremely rare, 1 in a trillion. And as only women can possess this particular skill. Kenneth's countenance was severely serious as he continued, "There is one thing that can be taken from them, their virginity. There's this overlord of the central region who wants to set out a lustful demon array. To do so, he needs to find 3 women who have the purple power body, and they all have to be in the stage of the internal elixir realm." Virginity and lust. As Zen heard the pair of words, his face turned darker and more furious. Unlike normal cultivation methods, there were also evil techniques for one to refine the self and gain inner energy. These evil methods required the practitioners to practice evil deeds, and some had to be acquired through sex with virgins. Apparently, this overlord of the central region was one of those who used such evil means. His goal wasn't a common one, for he required the virginity of 3 purple power bodies of the internal elixir realm. One could hardly imagine how powerful this overlord must have been. Didn't you say that the purple power body was extremely rare, possessed by only 1 in a trillion? And he wants 3, how is that possible? Questioned Zen. However powerful this overlord might have been, his pursuit seemed to be in vain. The purple power body was so rare that only 1 woman out of hundreds of millions possessed it, and yet the overlord wanted to find 3 of them. What was more, he needed all of them to be in the internal elixir stage. How could that be? With a shake of his head, Kenneth slowly said, I have no idea. These matters are far too high up for me to fathom. 3 purple power bodies of the internal elixir stage sound impossible to find, but some masters in the central region have unimaginable means to get what they want. With their superhuman skills, they know everything that's happening between heaven and earth. There is a possibility that they might find 3 women that match the criteria eventually, and that's why we sent Yan to Perdition Mountain. Practice or punishment, it's merely an excuse. Yan's imprisonment is truly for protection. We are trying to protect her from this overlord and from all the others who would use her. Now, it all made sense. It was no wonder his sister had been confined, a mission of protection disguised in punishment. Though he could finally sigh in relief, sadness built up inside Zen. It was all his fault, he believed, being too weak to protect his own sister. Once her true nature was exposed to the public, Zen couldn't even imagine what would happen to her. After everything, he knew that he owed Kenneth an apology. Cloud Hall had done all they could to protect his beloved Yan. But there was another question that still hung over his head. Was this overlord within the authority of Cloud Hall or from the other forces of the central region? Irritated at the situation, Zen contemplated on the matter. In spite of his anger, he was no fool. For the whole time he spoke, Kenneth sounded sincere in his authority. But he didn't owe Zen an explanation. After all, Kenneth was a senior member of Cloud Hall and would do things in Cloud Hall's interest. If the overlord was also a member of Cloud Hall, Kenneth would never stand against him for Yan's sake. If that were the case, they could no longer rely on Kenneth's kindness. Time, Zen suddenly thought. I need time to improve and become stronger, he swore deep inside. For Yan's sake and my own sake I must become stronger. The sooner I do, the better. Is it possible to arrange a meeting with my sister? After a thought, Zen suddenly inquired. With a smile, Kenneth nodded his head and promised, of course you can visit her. You're also allowed to bring her out of Torture Mountain for a while, but not too long. The overlord already knows about Yan's talents and has paid quite a few visits to Cloud Sect. To protect Yan, we lied to him and said she was still in her confinement. If he happens to spot her outside of Torture Mountain, we'd be exposed. All of us, especially Yan, would be in severe trouble. I understand. Thank you for your advice, sir. I'll go meet her now, he calmly said. After the fierce struggle inside him, he restrained his anger and excitement. Too much caring and overthinking might lead to confusion when dealing with problems in the long term. Hearing about Yan's situation, Zen decided to keep his mind even. What he needed now wasn't to vent his anger but to find a solution to the problem. Elder Shu, take Zen to Perdition Mountain, ordered Kenneth. Following the command, Elder Shu summoned his transportation vehicle. An emerald green leaf of 5 square feet appeared beneath his boots. Urging Zen on, Elder Shu told him, stand on the leaf, Zen. I'll take you to Perdition Mountain. After bowing his head to Kenneth, Zen stepped on the leaf. Once he steadied himself, the leaf fluttered up and shot right up into the air. The thought of seeing his sister made Zen's heart race in excitement, he could barely keep it in, now. Chapter 296, Yan's homicidal intent. As if aware of Zen's fierce emotions, Elder Shu said without turning to face him, I know you are very emotional after hearing about your sister's matter. I'm not as wise as the sect leader, but I hope that you will listen to my experience gathered over several hundred years of life. It would be an honor to learn from you, Elder Shu, Zen replied respectfully. Elder Shu was the most powerful elder in Cloud Sect. He was subordinate to Kenneth and the deputy leader. Despite his power and influence, Elder Shu wasn't a member of Cloud Hall. Being a behemoth over the continent, Cloud Hall paid little attention to Cloud Sect in the eastern region. Instead, Cloud Hall nominated a sect leader and a deputy leader to take charge of Cloud sect. You are a great talent, which is why the sect leader is paying special attention to you. If you can pass the test of Cloud Road, Cloud Hall will appreciate you. After that, you will grow into a mighty figure and achieve great things, which are beyond my imagination. However, you have to remember this. You should learn to endure silently before you are powerful enough. Attracting unwanted attention might get you killed. Only by staying alive will you have the opportunity to achieve your dreams and to save your sister from her fate. Zen was shocked by those words. He stared at Elder Shu's back. It seemed that Elder Shu had managed to read his mind. After all, Zen's biggest weakness had always been his sister, Yan, and he couldn't keep calm about matters related to her. When Kenneth told him about her situation, Zen had been so distraught that he forgot to behave respectfully in front of the sect leader. Perhaps Kenneth wasn't offended as he had a good temperament. This time, Zen wasn't punished for being rude. However, what if it had been someone else? Then what would have happened to Zen? What if it had been the man who was planning to employ the lustful demon array and take Yan's virginity? That man was far stronger than Zen, and it would not be challenging for him to kill Zen. If Zen lost his cool and fought with that man, he would be courting death. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you for the warning, Elder Shu, Zen nodded and said. Elder Shu replied with a brief nod. Although Zen's matter had nothing to do with him, the uncontrollable resentment on the young man's face reminded Elder Shu of an experience in his younger days. It was similar to Zen's current circumstance. Still weak in the past, Elder Shu had forced himself to bite the bullet and hold a grudge until he was strong enough to take revenge. His advice to Zen had come from a lesson Elder Shu had learned earlier on. Zen had impressed Elder Shu with his excellent performance in the All Peaks competition. According to Elder Shu, Zen's future was full of promise, and it would be a pity if he died because of his hatred. The large leaf on which they stood flew in the sky at high speed. After a while, Hell Mountain appeared before them. A volcanic vent spewed molten lava on the top of Torture Mountain. It seemed ready to erupt. Black ash and steam rose high in the sky from time to time and carried with it the terrible smell of sulfur. A girl in green clothes sat on a platform with her closed eyes in meditation. Her life vitality flowed around her and continuously transformed into different shapes. At first, there were naughty fish that looked vivid and kept jumping and swimming in the air. After several seconds or more, the fish changed into butterflies and danced gracefully around the girl. It was a hard job to control one's life vitality so smoothly, and even James, the head of the Mo family who could turn his life vitality into many different weapons, would pale by comparison. After all, weapons were objects and were relatively easy to imagine. This girl could change her life vitality into alive animals that moved so vividly, and her understanding of life vitality's transformation was far more remarkable in this respect. After a while, the girl opened her eyes and stretched her hand. Her life vitality flowed out from her white, slender fingers and slowly formed the face of a man. It was a face with bright eyes and graceful eyebrows, and it looked true to life. It was her brother, Zen. I want to know how everything is with my brother. It is time for the All Peaks competition, but according to brother's level, he might not qualify to attend it. She shook her head and pursed her lips. They had exchanged a brief glance from a distance when Zen had visited Hell Mountain some months before. They hadn't even seen each other's faces clearly, but Yan was aware that Zen was just an outer disciple at that time. It was hard for an inner disciple to attend the All Peaks competition, let alone an outer disciple. Only those who stood out from among the inner disciples were qualified to participate. She thought, although Zen has talent, there is still a large gap between him and the top-ranked inner disciples. I wonder which peak he belongs to. Drizzle Peak is the lowest-ranked peak among the 33 peaks and has few talented disciples. So he might still have the opportunity to participate in the competition if he is in Drizzle Peak. At that thought, she stared at Zen's face, which she had created with life vitality, and smiled happily. Just at that moment, she detected the vibration of someone's life vitality in the air with her keen perception. She looked up at the sky and saw Elder Shu on his huge leaf. He was flying toward her. Who's that? Yan murmured when she noticed another figure standing behind Elder Shu. As she recognized the second man, Yan's eyes widened in surprise. Gradually, the expression on her face changed from doubt to astonishment and then amazement. She almost couldn't believe her eyes. After a while, Elder Shu's huge leaf reached the mountaintop and landed steadily on the platform. Zen stepped out from behind Elder Shu and stared at his sister in astonishment. Brother and sister stood frozen as they locked eyes. They had dreamed about their reunion thousands of times, but when it really happened, they were so surprised that they found it difficult to believe. Elder Shu stood aside silently. Although he had witnessed many departures and reunions during his past life, he still felt touched by the scene. The world of martial arts was cruel, yet it didn't lack such warm moments between families. Brother. Yan stood from the ground, rushed toward Zen, and threw herself into his arms without a second thought. She hugged her brother tightly. She was so excited that she forgot that she was a 16-year-old girl instead of a little kid. They had been separated for many years, and they had never thought that they would meet again in such a place and under these circumstances. Zen stroked his sister's hair affectionately as complex emotions coursed through him. They enjoyed the joy of the reunion and hugged for a long time before pulling away and observing each other. Over the years, Yan had grown as tall as Zen, and the little girl in his memories had changed into the beautiful young girl who now stood in front of him. Zen, how did you come here? It should have been prohibited. But Elder Shu has escorted you here. Yan asked. She knew that Zen had become an inner disciple as she noticed his black clothing, but she didn't understand why he enjoyed such special treatment from Elder Shu. I attended the All Peaks competition, Zen replied with a smile. Really? Asked Yan, her eyes widening in surprise. There was a hint of doubt in her expression. After all, Zen had only been a half step into the nature level 6 months before, and it would be difficult for him to reach the threshold of the All Peaks competition no matter how much he had progressed. Zen nodded. What is the result? Asked Yan. She had taken part in the event previously and had got a good grade. Thanks to her outstanding performance, Lady Peak had ranked second among the 33 peaks. In the past, Yan had been defeated by a personal disciple. Despite that battle, she was ranked 8th in the Cloud Sect chart, although her name was removed from the chart after she was sent to Perdition Mountain. There's still one fight left before the final result is announced, replied Zen. One fight left? What do you mean? Yan asked perplexedly. Elder Shu chuckled from the side and piped in, he's right. There's still one more fight. It will be held in 3 days, and it will decide who takes the first place and who ranks second in this All Peaks competition. What? Yan covered her mouth with her hand, and her brown eyes were filled with astonishment. The first place and the second. But brother, you are only at the second grade of the nature level now, right? Yes, Zen said, still smiling. But, Yan found it difficult to believe their words. However, she knew of Elder Shu's status at Cloud Sect. She believed that there was no need for him to deceive her. Aside from that, it was Elder Shu who had brought Zen to Perdition Mountain, and the special treatment further proved that Zen had achieved excellent results in the All Peaks competition. Yan stammered several times. When no words came out, she smiled with embarrassment. The childish innocence on her face added to her beauty. After a while, she recovered from her astonishment and said with a smile, that is great. I always knew that my brother is the best. Despite her astonishment, Yan accepted the incredible fact in a short time because she believed in her brother. In her mind, Zen had always been invincible. Perhaps, for this reason, it didn't take her long to overcome the doubt she had initially felt. Zen, how is our father? Yan suddenly changed the topic. Zen's expression hardened when he heard her question. His sister still didn't know that their father had passed away. He wondered, how should I tell her? I can't conceal the truth from her. Even if I don't tell her now, she will find out, sooner or later. After hesitating for a while, Zen eventually said honestly, our uncles murdered him. What? Yan stammered, shocked by the grievous news. Bryson and Ken were 2 ruthless beasts. They murdered our dad to steal the position of clan head, Zen explained in an icy cold voice. Zoom. The life vitality around Yan's body transformed into numerous sharp spines all of a sudden. Her purple power body contained more life vitality than others at the same level. What was more, she absorbed energy from the air at a much higher speed. Owing to these 2 reasons, Yan didn't always keep all her life vitality inside her body as most people did. Sometimes, she even needed to spend some excessive vitality purposely. And now, she used the life vitality around her body to form spines, which displayed the monstrous homicidal intent inside her and allowed her to vent her fierce emotions. Chapter 297, Return Home for Revenge. As she was imprisoned on Hell Mountain, Yan had been separated from her family members for several years. She was also almost completely isolated from the outside world. Yan did not expect that when she finally saw her brother, Zen, she would hear the news of her beloved father's death. Yan felt great sorrow, and the urge to avenge her father was strong. Killing desire boiled inside her. Yet, her killing desire was shown in a very gentle way. Even though her eyes became red and welled up with tears, she still looked elegant and beautiful. In her brother's eyes, she looked like a little wounded female leopard, on the edge of bursting with her grief and anger. Obviously, he had sensed the life vitality, in the shape of sharp spikes, floating around her. Yan practiced a unique cultivation method. It was so special that the life vitality around her was a reflection of what she was thinking, which meant that she could visualize her thoughts through her life vitality. She turned her head suddenly, and all spikes were aimed at Elder Shu. Her abrupt action startled Elder Shu. Of course, with his strength, Elder Shu was naturally not afraid that Yan would hurt him. Instead, he was worried that Yan would not be able to withstand the grief she was feeling. After all, she was still a little girl, even younger than Zen. Elder Shu, I want to leave Hell Mountain for a few days, Yan said calmly. Elder Shu was lost in silence for a while. According to the rules, it would be unwise for him to allow Yan to leave Hell Mountain. Cloud Sect had imprisoned Yan at Hell Mountain in the name of cultivation. If she left and something dramatic happened, it would hurt Cloud Sect's reputation. Didn't our sect leader give her that permission before? He said that my sister, Yan, could leave Hell Mountain for a short time. Zen reminded Elder Shu about the permission given by the head of Cloud Sect. Well, I am not saying it's impossible, Elder Shu said as he thought. After all, the eastern region is not close to the central region, and even if Yan leaves for a short while, the people in the central region may not find out about her leaving. In that case, please allow me to leave for a while. Although I am trapped on Hell Mountain in the name of my practice, no one dictates that I have to practice all the time and that I can't go out for a walk in some fresh air, right? Yan reasoned calmly. She had long known about the fact that she had been chosen to be a sacrifice for an evil array by a certain mighty master. Yet, she had decided how she would deal with the fact. If someday in the future, that mighty master managed to gather 3 women with the purple power body and the cultivation level of internal elixir, Yan would commit suicide if she had not found alternatives. In this matter, she was indifferent, unlike Zen, because she could choose to kill herself at any time and no one could stop her. I can apply for permission on your behalf from our leader. But I need to know what your purpose for leaving Cloud Set will be. Elder Shu asked, wanting to confirm the details. Yan looked at the distant mountains with cold eyes. Although she was a girl, she was also a warrior practicing martial arts. If she didn't have a strong heart after stepping on the road to practice martial arts, she would have no long-term development. Thus, although the terrible news of her father's death saddened her, Yan would not behave like other girls by immersing herself in grief and self-pity. The world of cultivators involved blood, killing, cruelty, and firm will. Still, she was not completely cruel and cared for her brother and father. Now, her father's death hardened Yan's heart and made her appear harsh. She gritted her teeth and uttered 4 words, return home for revenge. These 4 simple words sounded powerful and full of killing aura. Hearing Yan's words, Elder Shu nodded. He understood Yan's reaction. It was impossible for anyone to swallow such pain, and any cultivator would kill those who had murdered a member of their family. Elder Shu then looked at Zen as he waited for his answer. Elder Shu did not care about the private business of the Luo clan, but he knew a little bit about it. As Yan's brother, Zen should make decisions about such matters. Zen heaved a big sigh. He knew that he had to return home to handle family affairs. After much thought, he said, I've been away from home for so long. It's time to return, but there is still one last competition between Patrick and me. After the competition, we'll head home. All right, I also want to watch this competition. I want to see for myself if my brother is lying. Are you that awesome? Said Yan, blinking her eyes. Elder Shu said with an awkward smile, you little girl, I am a senior elder. Do I need to lie to you about this kind of thing? It's possible, Yan said as she adjusted her mood and gave a soft smile. Her smile was so dazzling that it lit up her face and added a layer of soft splendor and beauty. Although Yan believed in Zen, she still found it hard to accept. How could her brother compete for the first place during the All Peaks competition only through his strength at the 2nd grade of the nature level? She wanted to see it with her eyes. For the next 3 days, Zen practiced in a secret room and processed everything he had learned from the All Peaks competition. The most important thing for a cultivator was talent and foundation. For example, although some disciples from the top 7 noble clans might have high talents, their actual combat effectiveness was not strong. On the one hand, they did not work hard to practice, and more importantly, they took well-refined pills to cultivate and improve their cultivation level. Thus, their foundation was somewhat unstable despite their virtually high level. It was not impossible to practice by taking well-refined pills, but before taking the pills, one should build a solid foundation. If his foundation were not stable, it would negatively affect the top level that one might reach, which meant that he might meet the ceiling and could not make a breakthrough. Some talented cultivators would choose not to boost their progress. On the contrary, they would suppress their level until it could not be suppressed, and then they could make a natural breakthrough in their current level. Although Zen's level was improving very slowly, a major reason was that he had not taken any well-refined pill. So far, he was at the second grade of the nature level, but his foundation was far more stable and solid than other cultivators. However, after the All Peaks competition, Zen had a subtle feeling that he was about to make a breakthrough, and this feeling was growing stronger and could not be suppressed anymore. After 3 days of practice in the secret room, Zen left with improved strength. He had now reached the third grade of the nature level. During these 3 days, Zen was busy practicing and comprehending. As a result, he felt that with the blink of an eye, these 3 days had slipped away. Not only had he made a breakthrough in his level, but he had also acquired a certain understanding about the killing aura, or the malicious aura. After establishing a connection with the killing sword mountain, Zen had researched on the fundamentals of the malicious aura, and he found that the malicious aura was actually a kind of strange energy. Earlier, Zen felt that the malicious aura was a destructive force. After all, killing and slaughtering other living creatures was a catastrophe for them. Yet, Zen quickly overturned the idea after he took advantage of the malicious aura that came out of his sword spirit, Lily. He studied the aura and tried to find answers to his questions. The malicious aura was quite different from a destructive force, it was actually a life force. When any creature was being slaughtered, it would be very reluctant, angry, and sad. It would curse the beast that killed it so that the beast wouldn't have a peaceful and natural death. Then, the creature would die with deep resentment. And a malicious aura was formed in such a situation. As a matter of fact, it was a kind of cursing force reserved by a dying creature at the last moment of its life. Even if a creature was rather small, such as an ant, it could still curse before its death. But the ant might not have a mind of its own, as it worked for the queen ant all its life. And so, how could it send out the power of a curse? Zen did not understand about that. So he concluded that it was due to the miracle of the creator. But ants were so small and weak that the force of their curse could be almost negligible. The stronger the creature was, the more powerful its life energy would be, and the more powerful its curse would be. The force of these curses was attached to the body of the killer, and as time went by, it gradually formed the malicious aura. Because a malicious aura was originally the cursing power released by a living creature that was unwilling to die but was killed, it was regarded as something harmful. Nevertheless, there were so many geniuses in this world. At some point, a genius invented the method of using a malicious aura to transform what was originally harmful to his body into his way of attack. Malicious auras contained life force, and naturally, they were very powerful. Yet, as the saying goes, every coin has two sides. Despite the power, malicious auras also had terrible effects. The greater the number of creatures killed, the larger the number of malicious auras earned by a cultivator. In the process, the disciple who practiced this kind of cultivation method might be inadvertently attacked and controlled by the malicious aura in his body. As a result, he would become mad. But for Zen, the negative effect of a malicious aura was not a problem. He had connected with the Killing Sword Mountain, where he could deposit and withdraw malicious auras as he wished. The only problem for him was that he was not a bloodthirsty killer and he had no source of malicious auras. The more malicious auras he consumed, the fewer it would become. The problem could only be solved later, as he hadn't found any feasible solution so far. Currently, he had to focus on his last competition. The area around the battle ring of the All Peaks competition was now filled with more people than any competition before. Because the previous competitions were over and this was the final match between Zen and Patrick, the highlight and championship event of the All Peaks competition, the disciples of Cloud Sect, whether inner or outer disciples, were no longer restricted to watching the match on site. The senior leaders of Cloud Sect had made a rule that each disciple who wanted to watch the match on site needed to pay 1 point for the entrance fee. After all, a large organization like Cloud Sect would not want to lose such a brilliant business opportunity. A point was not a significant cost for inner disciples. Even for the common disciples who were promoted as inner disciples, they could more or less complete some tasks to earn some points. What was more, some of the inner disciples who did not qualify to participate in the All Peaks competition would be happy to enter the arena at the cost of 1 point. It was a well-known fact that watching a competition was a great way to improve strength, and perhaps, the onlookers would experience a sudden epiphany and make a breakthrough in their current level. But a point was too costly for outer disciples. Only disciples from noble clans could bear such a cost. Even so, they gnashed their teeth when they used 2 cubic crystals to exchange for a point. The poor disciples were worse off. They didn't have enough cubic crystals and couldn't complete tasks in exchange for points. Finally, they had no choice but to miss this great opportunity and watch the competition through the picture slab with the function of a live broadcast. The picture quality on Cloud Sect's picture slab was pretty good, but it was not the same experience as watching the match from the arena. The points collected during the competition were estimated to be over 100,000 based on the number of the disciples on the site of the All Peaks competition. In fact, there were so many disciples that they surrounded the arena in several concentric circles. Yan wore a purple mask and stood in a corner. Her perfectly shaped eyes were filled with astonishment when she saw how many people had come to witness the match. She had attended the All Peaks competition before, but she had never seen so many onlookers on site in such a large-scale competition like today. Has Cloud Sect developed far beyond my imagination in the past few years? I keep hearing so many of them talking about Zen. Since when did my brother gain such popularity? Yan wondered. Even Yan, a rising star, didn't receive so much attention and such popularity the year in which she participated. Her mind was unable to find rational answers to all these questions. But in a few moments, she didn't want to think more about it. Her long eyelashes flickered as she took a deep breath. Then her eyes narrowed into crescents the moment she saw Zen walking into the arena and waving at her. Chapter 298. The Power of His Fist. Zen stood in the middle of the field and waved at Yan in front of 100,000 disciples of Cloud Sect. His action caught their attentions. Who was over there? Who was Zen greeting? To satisfy their curiosity, the disciples looked in the direction Zen was waving at. And they saw a beautiful girl in a veil. Slender and tall, she was as graceful as a dustless cyan lotus. Although she had veiled her face, her bright eyes were charming enough to catch everyone's attention. Who is that girl? She is so pretty, one disciple exclaimed. I have never seen her before, another disciple answered. Her eyes are so bewitching. I imagine everyone will be swept off their feet by her exquisite features if she removes her veil. Take off her veil, would you dare? Although she has hidden her cultivation base, I am sure she is no less capable than the others. At least you're no match for her. Alas, Zen is so lucky, if only I could meet such a beautiful girl. The disciples spoke in hushed tones, and their voices were full of envy and jealousy. Sensing so many eyes on her, Yan felt a little nervous. After all, she hadn't seen such a magnificent spectacle for a long time. Nina glared at the beautiful veiled woman. Since paying just 1 point would enable her to watch the match from the arena's side, she decided not to miss it. 1 point was nothing to her. But she was surprised to see Zen waving at a woman after she arrived at the scene. Nina had never seen any woman around Zen before. But since the All Peaks competition began, Zen was often surrounded by women. Nina pouted, full of displeasure. She didn't know that the veiled woman was Zen's sister, Yan. She was jealous for the wrong reason. While the disciples were talking about the mysterious woman, Patrick entered the field. In his last fight with Rocher, he had summoned Akelanatha to defend against Rocher's heavenly punishment sword that was with extreme thunder sword intent. The power that he had showed in that fight was so awesome that it impressed everyone. It was not until then did they realize that Patrick had hidden his strength so well. It was no exaggeration to say that Cloud Sect was really full of unnoticed talents. Patrick was still so young, but he had so much power, and he was the reincarnation of Akelanatha. People had every reason to believe that his future achievements might not be less than Cloud Sect's leader, Kenneth. As for Zen, the disciples regarded him with an uneasy sense of foreboding. Although Zen had also beaten Rocher and owned the sword spirit, the arm was no match for the thigh. How could he compete with Patrick, who was the reincarnation of Akelanatha? There were many extensive and profound mysteries in Buddhism. Cultivating according to the Buddhist doctrine, Patrick had achieved a strong cultivation base. Although Zen was outstanding, he paled in comparison with Patrick, no matter in his martial arts level or the strength that he had shown. Somehow, I have the feeling that Zen is going to win, said a disciple. Then another disciple echoed his words. I have the same feeling, although when Zen fought with Rocher, the power that Zen has shown was not as strong as Patrick's. We know that at the very beginning of the All Peaks competition, Zen was just an ordinary disciple. As the end of the competition drew near, his strength grew steadily as he keeps breaking through in every fight. Yeah, you are right. Zen is, indeed, a strange person. Every fight he participated in looked treacherous and hard to win no matter who he was battling with. He always won unexpectedly whether his opponent was at the consummation of the nature level or the illuminating soul realm or even Rocher. Maybe he can win this time against Patrick. Haha. On the whole, the majority of disciples thought Patrick would win, while the rest hoped that Zen would win. The most apparent difference between Patrick and Zen was that they were in different realms. If Zen could beat Patrick when he was just at the second grade of the nature level, what was he going to achieve when he reached the illuminating soul realm? Standing firmly on the field and with eyes focused on Zen, Patrick said solemnly, I appreciate that you gave me 3 days to rest. I suppose that if I don't summon Akalanatha, I'll have a hard time beating you. Zen slowly drew his sword from its sheath. He shook his head slightly and said, It is not me but my dedication to martial arts that chose to fight with the strongest opponent. A genuine warrior wins a competition fair and square. If I exploited your weakness to secure my success, I would feel pent up, and my inner desire would not be satisfied. Cultivators often encountered a variety of bottlenecks. If negative affection simmered inside them, they would feel a tightness in the chest and would not break through, so their practice would be suspended. Therefore, regardless of victory or defeat, Zen opted to fight with Patrick only after he was sure that Patrick was in good physical condition. I see, said Patrick, with a gleam of admiration. I haven't seen such an ambitious and brave person like you in a long time. As Patrick cultivated himself according to Buddhist doctrine, he could keep his present peaceful state of mind only by following the 10 commandments of Buddhism. But Zen had trained himself as per sword skills. Without prerequisite commandments that he could stick to, the nature of his martial arts was proof that he was a self-possessed person. Apart from Zen's strong soul and indestructible body, he was also a man with a firm will. Patrick had to admit that Zen was a powerful opponent. No more delays. I am going to win this fight. Upon finishing his words, Zen thrust his sword toward Patrick. The sword dazzled in the sunshine. Just like Rocher, Zen also decided to cast the first stone. Patrick was so powerful that it was better to gain an advantage by attacking him first. Rocher's strategy was the same as Zen's, but unfortunately, Rocher had failed to seize the initiative, and Patrick had defeated him. With a smile, Patrick struck back at his opponent. He brought his hands together and exerted the shadow finger by pointing the forefingers and the ring fingers at Zen while keeping the remaining fingers attached loosely. Patrick naively assumed that he could retaliate against the attack. But it was Zen that he was dealing with, not Rocher. Rocher was a born swordsman, and he extensively relied on his weapon, the blood-corroding sword. Zen was an all-rounder. He wasn't entirely dependent on his sword when battling his opponents. He had other weapons besides the sword. Ding! Zen's sword made a slight metallic sound and was deflected from Patrick when Patrick's fingertips sent out a blast of powerful air current. If it had been Rocher, he would have tried to steady his sword and then counterattack by exerting the sword step to cope with the situation. But Zen had a different style. After jerking his sword away, Zen aimed his fist at Patrick. Dragon scales, come on. With the power of over 100 dragon scales, the muscles on his arms began to swell like a balloon being inflated. Blue veins stood out on his arms and looked as though small dragons were resting on them. Patrick had not expected that Zen would strike him with only his fist. What was even more surprising was that Zen was not using his life vitality. So when Patrick saw Zen's punch heading his way, he underestimated the power of the fist and paid little attention to it. He thought he could dissolve it by using the grand leaf palm method. But when Zen's fist came closer, Patrick was rather stunned, and the color drained from his face. The power of Zen's fist was far beyond Patrick's imagination. He had no choice but to form a golden bell to protect himself. In the past, when under attack, Patrick could always keep his mind and stayed calm. But now, his heart was pounding in his chest. He thought, is this guy a human being? Only deities in heaven can have such strength. Dong! The fist struck the bell. The golden bell was indeed very solid. But under the force carried in Zen's fist, although it did not shatter, it became veined with cracks. The power in Zen's punch had been so great that Patrick was catapulted away. His body soared through the air until it hit the light curtain of enchanted barrier. The elders of Cloud sect had predicted that the fight between Zen and Patrick would be fierce, and many disciples would come to watch the competition. To avoid accidents, they had reinforced the light curtain in advance. Therefore, even after such a violent impact, the enchantment only slightly wobbled and did not break. Zen pushed Patrick away with merely a fist. "It is a miracle," a disciple said with a startled look on his face. "You don't favor Patrick? Well, what can I say to you?" said another disciple who assumed that Zen would win. "And this is not the first time. I guess Patrick is going to show his tour de force and I bet Zen will be able to fight back. Zen is nothing without his strength. It is too soon to assume his victory. And Patrick hasn't fully exerted his strengths and skills yet. But do you know what the limitations of Zen's strength are? He hasn't even used life vitality." More and more people engaged in a discussion. Gradually some of them began to quarrel, and the dispute turned into a verbal battle. Among the bickering disciples, only one person stayed aloof. Zachary. Keeping his hands behind his back, he said with a flicker of a smile, "Proceed with your arguing, for all I care. Anyway, I have made enough money." In the final round, Zachary didn't gamble on Zen or Patrick. He had bet his money on Zen in every match, and he had won every bet. His wealth now could only be described as immeasurable. His banker in the gambling game had gone bankrupt. Learning from that lesson, other people chose not to gamble with Zachary if he bet on Zen. No one knew whether Zen would continue to win. If Zen should lose, well, they would be relieved. But if he won, they would also go bankrupt as Zachary had a lot of money to wager with. So Zachary didn't really care who was going to win. He had won enough money, anyway. And he might be the only one among the whole Cloud sect who became a moneybags after the All Peaks competition. He owed his wealth to Zen, and so he genuinely hoped that Zen would win. As Patrick picked himself up from the floor, a serious expression passed over his face. He had never felt as embarrassed as he did at that moment. Chapter 299, The Body in the Diamond-like State. Guard against complaining. Guard against anger. Guard against arrogance. Guard against impatience. Guard against greed. Guard against sex. Guard against. Patrick Pay recited the principles in his mind. He had a strong intellect, but that didn't mean he was without emotion. A human being couldn't possibly function without sentiment. Only a fairy man could resist feelings, not a human. However, Patrick had great restraint. He might have looked uneasy after Zen's hit, but he recovered in a relatively short amount of time, successfully calming himself down through his silent recitations. His mind was a flat, tranquil ocean with no movement in the waters. Suddenly there appeared ripples, about to become huge waves in lieu of the disturbance. But then the waves settled down once again under Patrick's control, and peace prevailed. "How is it possible that you have such great strength? There must be a limit to your innate superhuman power. Your strength contradicts the restrictions of nature creatures," Patrick said seriously as he gazed at Zen. Previously, Zen had utilized all of his strength. Most people who were witnesses to it didn't have sharp eyes like Patrick. He could see the unparalleled power in Zen. He was correct. Zen's strength, in fact, exceeded the limits of nature creatures. Strength could not be utilized without limitations. It required powerful muscles. If Zen had weak muscles when his body held this kind of extraordinary strength, it would not support him. In reality, Zen's body had strengthened hundreds or even thousands of times by now. It had become a middle-grade spiritual weapon. Clearly, his body had no problem supporting his superhuman strength. It was his best guarded secret. But he could not tell Patrick that. So he said with a smile, "Can I choose not to tell you?" "Of course," Patrick said, nodding. "But I am still confident about my own strength." Just as he said this, the golden bell vanished into the air. Golden life vitality effused out of Patrick's body, enveloping his skin. He seemed to shine, made up of pure gold. Patrick seemed to be in a similar state as when Zen's mysterious runes had appeared on his body. But in fact, they were two different situations. When Zen's body had begun to absorb the flame, the golden runes turned into little whirlpools. On the other hand, Patrick was enwrapped in his golden life vitality as if he was made up of gold. Body in the diamond-like state. His body is in the diamond-like state. One of the disciples shouted out loud. Watching Patrick transform himself into the body in the diamond-like state, Rocher sighed mentally. He had just made Patrick show his strength of Akalanath shadow, but apparently, Patrick had more tricks up his sleeve. The body in the diamond-like state was surely another one of his trump cards. Body in the diamond-like state. Zen wondered to himself. Looking at Patrick's golden, shining figure, Zen clenched his fist in anticipation, eager to fight him. Zen had the body of a spiritual weapon. It was so strong that perhaps even the body of Kenneth Shi, who was the head of the Cloud sect, was outmatched. The other people at the Cloud sect cultivated only their life vitality. Few could practice both the life vitality and the corporeal body. It was exceedingly hard to do so, and there was a limit to human life. If a person wanted the best of both worlds, perhaps he would end up learning neither of them well enough. That way, it wasn't advisable for most people to practice both. Strictly speaking, Zen did not cultivate both. The body refining technique was totally different from his way of getting hit. Zen was not cultivating his body, instead, he was refining a weapon, namely his body. His method of refining his body, although not a legitimate technique, was a lot more powerful in terms of the results it showed. As Patrick exhibited the body in the diamond-like state, Zen didn't seem perturbed. He wasn't preparing to fight, instead, he put his streamer sword back into his space ring. The behavior confused the disciples in the audience. What is Zen doing? Did he just put his weapon away? One disciple asked. I don't get it either. It doesn't make sense that he does not want to use his sword after Patrick employed the body in the diamond-like state. Is he admitting his defeat? Another disciple murmured. Does he want to fight Patrick with no weapon but his body? Zen's corporeal body is strong, but can it face the body in the diamond-like state successfully? What's wrong with him? Someone voiced his opinion, as astonished as the other two. Everyone seemed to freeze with amazement. They knew that Zen had innate superhuman strength and that his body was extraordinarily powerful. It was how Zen won the fights in the first tier of the All Peaks competition by defeating his rivals. Zen did have a remarkable amount of strength, but it wasn't limitless. Therefore, in the second half of the All Peaks competition, Zen used his sword to fight the battles, without relying solely on his innate superhuman strength and his body. The audience regarded this as pragmatic and sensible. The corporeal body could not be considered superior to one's life vitality. Facing some of the rivals who were not as strong as Jacques or Rocher, Zen could defeat them with his bodily strength alone. But now, facing Patrick in the diamond-like state, Zen chose to not use his sword. It came as a surprise to most disciples. They couldn't believe their eyes. Patrick wasn't using a weapon because he was using the body in the diamond-like state. The golden coating on Patrick's skin was made out of life vitality. It wasn't his ordinary body at play. In this circumstance, how could Zen think he'd manage to fight without his sword? Did he not want to make it out of this alive? At this moment, the most surprised person on the sidelines was Yan Luo. Yan sat amidst the crowd, her eyes clinging to her brother Zen. Having defeated so many disciples and reaching to the top, she knew Zen was strong. Yan hadn't watched Zen fight earlier, but she knew it in her heart. She never thought her own brother could be this strong, that he could defeat so many who were on a superior level to his own. It would be diamond cut diamond, Yan told herself as she cheered for him. How confident he is. Zen, I believe you. Fight. Yan was not sure her brother could defeat Patrick with his muscles alone. Although she believed in her brother, she still felt nervous. Her sweaty fingers clenched and unclenched themselves in her fists. Zen and Patrick looked like two beasts from some savage land. They watched each other, staring into the other's eyes sharply. Suddenly, they rushed forward simultaneously. Both of them ran at high speed. They used their strongest moves and neither of them could defend himself. The two collided with each other. There seemed to be no skills involved in this, it was pure hand-to-hand combat. Watching the pair, the sheer beauty of bodily strength was not lost on the spectators. They fought with their bare fists. The audience was thrilled, the disciples could hardly breathe. Pow, bang, crack, Zen didn't seem as strong as Patrick when it came to fist fighting. Patrick had learned different kinds of refinement methods. His fist movements were complicated and involved several elements. However, Zen was stronger when it came to his corporeal body. The body in the diamond-like state could survive more strikes than Zen's body, which was a spiritual weapon. Patrick's body was also more solid and capable of defending itself, but Zen could mitigate Patrick's powerful blows by transforming them into warm currents as a way of refining his own body. Under these circumstances, Zen was at the forefront of the battle and took advantage of it. Moreover, he could utilize the power of the dragon scales in his body. He would not be outdone in a competition of strength. All in all, he was actually stronger than Patrick. In each round of their fight, Patrick attacked Zen 3 or 4 times, but the latter fought back only once. His one strike was far better than the totality of Patrick's assaults. Ah, Zen has been hit again. A disciple exclaimed. I can't watch it anymore. If I were beaten like that, I'm afraid I would have died already. Someone responded. It would be a mercy if you just died that easily. Don't underestimate Patrick's power. If he hits at your chest, he would be sure to leave a big hole in your body. A third disciple corrected them. Zen won't be able to fight anymore if he keeps getting beaten up like this. What they were saying sounded reasonable. But the truth escaped them, for the situation on the arena was quite different. Patrick had been most confident about his body in the diamond-like state. He had planned to use it against Zen's streamer sword, for he thought that would be his biggest threat. But as it stood now, Zen wasn't using his streamer sword at all. It was Zen's own choice. Patrick had no say in it. But the results were unexpected. The more Patrick fought, the more surprised he got. He could hardly keep calm. Now, his mind was like the turbulent waters in an ocean as huge waves rolled over. It appeared that Zen was not afraid of being beaten up. Patrick knew how strong he was. He might not have innate superhuman strength like Zen, but he could use his life vitality to the fullest. Zen's body should not be able to resist the power in Patrick's fists. But as Patrick watched Zen, reality contradicted his previous notions. How strong is Zen's body? It can't simply be measured on a scale of human physicality. He seems like a beast. He thought. Dang, I shouldn't have used the body in the diamond-like state at all. At this moment, Patrick seemed to have forgotten about Buddhism doctrines. He already broke a commandment out of the 10, that he must never swear, whatever the circumstance. Chapter 300. Breaking the diamond-like body. In breaking a record, Zen had made a man as prudent and calm as Patrick Piston even resort to cursing. Worse, things looked awkward in the arena. From everyone's point of view, it appeared as though Zen was at a disadvantage. He ended up getting beaten most of the time. He only fought back occasionally, after taking 3 or 4 strikes. But what was strange was that the more blows Zen took, the more excited he became. His eyes brightened up and glowed with radiant vigor. On the other hand, Patrick, though he did most of the beating, seemed upset and depressed, as if holding a bear by the tail. What no one knew was that warm currents steadily streamed into Zen's body. That was why he didn't suffer. On the contrary, the flow of currents made him feel content. How could he not be excited with such a stimulus of joy? It was thrilling for audiences to watch the two fight hand to hand. But for Patrick, he thought it a dull game and only felt bored. Still, he had to endure the match and continuously beat Zen. After a while, the golden light around Patrick dimmed, especially in areas where Zen repeatedly hit him, like his chest and arms. The light around these points slowly faded, revealing the natural color of the flesh. The body in the diamond-like state was said to make one's body indestructible, but in fact, it mostly depended on the golden light surrounding the body. After the golden light barrier suffered excessive blows, the life vitality forming the barrier would scatter. And that meant the body in the diamond-like state was rendered useless. Oh my goodness, it's broken. The golden light barrier has been broken by Zen's physical strength, barehanded. I was right, Zen is indeed a monster. Someone cried out. No, he's not a monster. He's a magic weapon in a human form. He is foolproof against beatings. The disciple who made the last comment couldn't believe what he was seeing. He unwittingly praised Zen when he described him as a human form magic weapon. Actually, he hit the nail on the head. Beyond that, Zen was a magic weapon constantly being refined through every battle, tempered by the beatings he sustained from every foe. In the final attack, Zen thrust himself on Patrick and shattered the golden light shimmering over his enemy. With a painful moan, Patrick backed away a few steps before halting. It was evident he had suffered an internal injury. However, Patrick disregarded his injury. What he cared about was losing to Zen in their hand-to-hand fight. That made him a failure. And it irked him that Zen still had that cheerful smile on his face as if he didn't get beaten enough. By this time, Patrick even entertained illusions that Zen specially put on that smile to entice him to beat him up more. But it was a whimsical thought that Patrick knew he should never feel proud to voice out. After all, there was no one in the world who was crazy enough to invite beatings to themselves. He was sure Zen was not a masochist. Still, there was no way of ever knowing if what was running in his head was the truth. Meanwhile, Zen felt that he didn't get beaten enough. Had it not been for fear of arousing suspicion about his remarkable body, Zen hoped that Patrick would throw several more punches at him. Shaking his head, Patrick mocked, "It seems that I overestimated myself. I thought I could defeat you with my corporeal body, but I guess I was overly naive. The battle was not over. A golden shadow appeared behind Patrick as he released all the life vitality from his body. Slowly, the shadow took on the form of a Buddha. Akalanatha had two forms. The first was called Wrath Manifestation, where the Buddha showed an angry face. Patrick had used this to defeat Rocher's heavenly punishment sword. The second form was called Bodhisattva Manifestation, where the Buddha wore a smiling face. Although the Wrath Manifestation had an angry face, it was not the most powerful Dharma Laksana. Akalanatha's strongest form was actually the Bodhisattva Manifestation. The shadow behind Patrick was becoming a clear shape as his life vitality gathered strength and condensed. What appeared was not the same Buddha that Patrick had used to fight Rocher. The truth was that the Akalanatha had a Buddhist allegorical expression. There was a gentle smile on his face, as if enjoying a warm spring breeze. But this was really the Bodhisattva manifestation of the Akalanatha. Patrick meant business this time. The Buddha is different this time. He's smiling, and he's not as intimidating as the Buddha Patrick used to defeat Rocher the last time, one disciple observed. Yes, I agree with you. In the last fight with Rocher, the Buddha had a vicious look, and he gave us the shivers even with a mere glance at him. But the smiling Buddha right now doesn't look intimidating at all. Another one said. You idiots, that is the Bodhisattva manifestation. The discussion among the crowd reverberated in Zen's ears. Staring at the lofty shadow of the Akalanatha, Zen's face turned more serious. The disciples all talked like a bunch of idiots. How could they even think that the Buddha's strength had anything to do with his expression? Whether he smiled or not, wasn't the point. Besides, Zen could sense hostility in the Buddha's smiling eyes. And he looked more horrifying than the angry Akalanatha. Taking out the streamer sword from his space ring, Zen was determined to go all out in this fight. There was a wicked gleam in Patrick's eyes. He clasped his hands and held his palms together. After several seconds, he suddenly opened his hands and clapped at Zen. At the same time, the Bodhisattva manifestation of Akalanatha that was behind him reached out his two palms to swat Zen. Alongside the Buddha's huge hands, Zen was about the size of a mosquito. The disciple had no doubt that he would either be flattened or crushed if those palms slapped him. A loud clapping sound rang out. A thunderous sound echoed in the field once the Buddha's huge golden palms slammed together. But Zen reacted quickly enough. The second before the Buddha's palms met in an attempt to squash him, the disciple soared upward like a shooting star and leapt high into the air. Unfortunately, flying wasn't one of Zen's skills. And no matter how high he rose into the air, the young man would eventually fall. There was nothing for him to hold on in the air, so there was no way to escape Buddha's fury. Through all this, Patrick's eyes never wavered from Zen. In a flash, he raised his hand and gestured a backhanded slap. Buddha mirrored the movement and was ready to swat Zen. Bam! This time, the palm caught Zen. The tremendous force of the hand hitting Zen sent him back into the air. The momentum slammed the disciple into the light enchanted barrier. He bounced off the barrier and fell heavily to the ground. Created by several elders of the Cloud sect, the enchanted barrier was as solid as a rock. But a large hole was left after Zen rammed into it. Patrick should have used this strategy earlier so the fight wouldn't last so long. He could have manipulated the shadow of the Akalanatha to attack Zen at the start. That way Zen would have no chance to come near him, one disciple said. While others agreed with his comment, most did not. These disciples remained silent. What they were more concerned about was whether or not Zen would be able to rise again. Being hit by the Buddha's shadow with such force from his huge palms meant hitting the ground hard, and most likely not being able to stand up again. Worse, there was the risk of losing one's life due to the impact or getting bones crushed, and it would even result in a body explosion. In this case, that person was Zen, so no one in the audience dared to draw any conclusions. They accepted that Zen was a unique being. He was nothing like any human they knew, so they couldn't judge the current situation using the usual common senses. People would find it hard to believe if Zen would easily be killed by Patrick. Right now, they stood transfixed while watching all that was happening. After suffering a violent attack, which to an ordinary person would have been a fatal blow, Zen slowly got to his feet. His eyes remained firm. It looked as if Patrick didn't hurt him too much. But while he was not badly injured, Zen realized he was still in a lot of trouble. The shadow of Akalanatha moved too fast. The Buddha's palms moved simultaneously with Patrick, and at the same speed. Thus, when Patrick waved his hand, the Buddha would make the same movement at the same time. What made matters worse was that while Patrick's hands were only a few inches long, Akalanatha's palms were 7 to 8 times bigger. As Patrick maneuvered his hands almost in a flash, the two huge palms mirrored the same movements just as swiftly. It all happened too fast. Zen could hardly dodge the attacks, let alone approach Patrick. He knew that if he couldn't get close to Patrick and attack him, he would definitely lose this battle. And while Zen had the stamina, his energy was consumed through the protracted fight. Patrick, meanwhile, could easily attack him with a simple wave of his hands. If it would take him the whole day, and through the night, to defeat Zen, Patrick would only be very pleased to repeat the same movements, probably even without batting an eye. While Zen was racking his brains to find a solution to his problem, the huge palms came at him again. Patrick was relentless in his attacks, refusing to give his opponent time to think and regroup. While thinking, Zen continued to dodge the assault against him. Only this time when he swerved, the disciple made a surprising move. Zen tossed his sword up in the air. The streamer's sword circled the air several times before falling. The move had everyone in a daze, when suddenly, a blood-red shadow soared out of Zen's body. The shadow instantly condensed into a shape as soon as it was released. It was Zen's sword spirit, Lily. Once Lily was out, she rushed towards the streamer's sword, grasped it, then accelerated and pointed the weapon at Patrick. As Lily was a swordsman herself, she was capable of using the sword in the fight. However, Zen only had one metal blade at this time and needed it to ward off an attack by Buddha. Thinking quickly, he tried dodging the huge palms of Buddha while manipulating Lily into attacking Patrick at the same time.